Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Panel. I'm Edward Lee and I'm Chair of the Police and Crime Panel. Please can all participants turn phones to silent so we don't get interrupted. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Peterborough City Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. The minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the Peterborough City Council's YouTube page. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the panel to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted, except when invited to speak. The Acting Commissioner and his staff have opted for security reasons to join us via telephone, and therefore their faces will not appear on the live stream, but as a phone symbol instead. I ask that they too keep their phones on mute except when invited to speak. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function in a participant screen or reaction section, depending on if you are using the updated version of Zoom. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the relevant person to respond. If we should run into any technical problems, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault and the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I will begin with a roll call of the panel members to confirm your attendance. So Councillor Ali.
Present.
Councillor Bywater.
Present.
Councillor Daunton.
Present.
Councillor Giles.
Present.
Councillor Massey.
Present.
Councillor Sharp.
Present.
Councillor Shellens.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney. I believe we have apologies from him. Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Substituting for Councillor Warwick. Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Present.
Councillor Wiggin.
Present.
And independent member George.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. And myself, Edward Lee. We also have in attendance Fiona McMillan, who's the monitoring officer to the panel, Jane Webb, who's the secretariat to the panel, the acting Police and Crime Commissioner, Jim Haylett, the acting Chief Executive of the OPCC, Nick Dean, the Chief Constable of the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, Nikki Phillipson, Head of Strategic Partnerships and Commissioning, and Christina Strood, Head of Police for Fire and Head of Policy for Fire and Police and the OPCC, Matthew Warren, the Chief Finance Officer for the OPCC, and John Lee, the Director of Finance and Resources at the Constabulary. As I said, everybody who is in attendance in an official capacity. Okay, thank you. So Jane, could you just confirm if who we've had apologies for absence from?
Thank you, Chair. From Councillor Woolwalk, Councillor Lynn is in attendance as substitute, and from Councillor Tierney.
Thank you. Do any members have a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest that they wish to declare? William.
Thank you, Chair. I have a member of my household who's employed by the Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you, noted. Okay, moving on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of December 2020, which start on page 3 of the agenda pack. Are there any corrections or additions any members would like to have noted? Councillor Massey.
Yes, it was just on page 9. It says Councillor Massey stated that the panel would be noting that there had been a fall, but it says full It was just, it's meant to say fall in public confidence.
Sorry, which line was this?
It's just right at the bottom of page 9 of the agenda pack.
Oh, yes. So, yes, sorry, is it reference? Yeah, I mean, yes, okay. So, Jen, could you just note that typo correction? Are there any other?
Chair, it's Jim Haley.
Yes. Please go ahead,
Yes,
Jen.
the bottom of page 7, Councillor Murphy 13.1. I think the third line, it makes a reference there to PCSOs, and I think the comment would have related to the PCC's office rather than PCSO's office.
Yes, I think you're correct on that. Yes, so yes, PCSOs should have been OPCC apostrophe S, or PCC's office, sorry. Thank you. Are there any other corrections to be noted? So our panel members happy to accept this as an accurate record of the meeting. Please indicate if you do not accept. Okay, let's see, unanimous acceptance. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to item 4. This is the Acting Commissioner's response to the panel's recommendations at the last meeting. Are there any comments or further questions on this? This begins on page 15 of the agenda pack. A letter from the Commissioner. No follow-up on that. Okay, so is the panel happy to note the response from the Commissioner? Okay, thank you. So moving on to item number 5, public questions. Jane, could you confirm if we've had any?
No, we've had none.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 6, the review of complaints. We've received no complaints, so there is nothing to discuss under that item. So moving on to item 7, which is the main agenda item for this meeting, on the precept report, considering the OPC's and Constabulary's budget and the proposed increase to the precept. Acting Commissioner, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you, Edward, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is a budget meeting, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending, especially those that attended the briefing session that the Chief Constable and I made available to the panel a while back. Thought it was a very good meeting there. But today it's all about costs, savings, resilience, and transformation, and ensuring that the Constabulary can meet the ever-changing criminal challenges that they face. It's also about ensuring that the risks are assessed, that we have value for money. It's also about sustainability and not just the present time. And when you look at it, it's about ensuring that our community is as safe as possible and that we protect the vulnerable and look after the victims. It's about the criminals and criminality and make sure that those items are addressed and that we do that to the best of our ability. So I'd like you to think about those when we're moving forward, especially about ensuring that the force can meet the ever-changing challenges to make our community safe and protect the vulnerable and the victims. So I would now like to hand over to the Chief Constable, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ray, this is Matthew. I'm just going to share my screen. But before I do so, I think it's probably just worth a few words from myself, if that's okay, Commissioner, because just in terms of the way the budget has been built this year, I think it's just worth the panel understanding that it's been done as a partnership. I think that's worth emphasising. There's a lot of significant challenges that obviously the constabulary face over the coming years, and not least COVID this year has presented some significant problems, particularly in terms of funding and how that will look moving forward. But what I would add is actually the robustness of these estimates is probably the most robust since I've been involved with the Police and Crime Commissioner and the constabulary. They've been through really quite a rigorous process to ensure that actually what they are asking for today both sets them up for next year and gives them a sustainable budget as we move forward. So that's all I wanted to say for now. I'm going to share my screen if I may, so you can see the pack, and then I'm going to turn around. I'm going to rename myself, so you'll see who's speaking, which will be the Chief Constable. So if you just give me a second, and hopefully all the technology will work. Okay, hopefully you should all see the actual on page 91 of your pack. Okay.
Okay, Matt.
Yep. Okay, there we go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Nick Dean, the Chief Constable here. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to brief you this afternoon. The first bit of the presentation really sets out the operational context to the police performance over the last 12 months and projected going forward. And although this is only a small snapshot, I hope you can see the screen, it just focuses in on 3 areas which I think I would like to highlight as importance to the organisation, the wider policing focus of government, and also in terms of, importantly, the community. So at the bottom of the slide, you will see a serious acquisitive crime example of burglary dwelling. This again is an organisational priority, a focus of serious acquisitive crime and combating that area of crime through the government focus, but importantly, as we see through the precept debate, also of vital importance to our communities. And you can see that the performance of the organisation has decreased burglary dwelling of people's homes by 6% over the last year. And importantly, the improvement in outcome rate is evident, from 11.3% to 12.8%. And that projection going forward is on an ever increasing projection going upwards, which is very pleasing to see. And alongside that performance is also important is the satisfaction of the people who we interact with in relation to being victims of crime in this category. So satisfaction again has gone up from 86%, one could say a really high percentage, to an outstanding performance of 90% within this acquisitive crime area. The middle section of this presentation highlights the hidden crime which often goes unforeseen within the communities, but is clearly of an importance. And it's an importance because it's an ever increasing area, and more so because the public have the confidence to come forward to the police service and to partner agencies to report such issues. So in relation to domestic abuse, as an example of this area, we've seen an 8% increase, which places, as I say, a pressure on the organisation. But again, improvement in detection rates and outcome rates from just over 10% to 12%. And again, the projection of that going forward is on an ever increasing projection as we go forward into 2021. The overall crime rate has decreased across the county by 7%. And finally, at the top of that side, you will see public confidence. Confidence in the police as a national projection is somewhere sitting in the 54% on are people confident that we are dealing with matters that are actually of their concern. So 54% is the national percentage. And you can see that the constabulary here in Cambridgeshire has reached 63.2% over the past 12 months. One area also to highlight is not on this slide, and again hidden from many of the public, is that area of serious and organised crime. Serious and organised crime has an exponential effect in terms of public, and therefore on their harm, and public confidence in dealing with that is of vital importance to us. Areas such as drugs importation, county lines, firearms importation, modern day slavery are just a selection of the organised crime and criminality that the constabulary is constantly dealing with. But to provide reassurance to the members of the panel and the wider community, then the largest number of disruptions and activity against this area of business has taken place over the last 12 months, not only using local, regional, but also national assets to protect the county. Prevention and this element is not easily seen by the community and not easily measured, but I can reassure you that dismantlement and disruption of organised crime groups which have tried to gain a foothold in this county have been on a positive projection. This is a government focus, it's an organisational focus, and we cannot lose sight of this important area of business as we go forward to provide an important protective layer across our communities to allow my officers and staff and also the communities to go about their business. Thanks, Matt. This just gives a further indication of the pressures the organisation is facing. You can see the dark blue bar on the right-hand side of the screen, and this outlines the funding element across the organisation, which John will go into in more detail later on in this presentation. But as a quick reminder, the funding formula, then 45% of the income of the organisation comes through council tax precept. And when we look at our quantity through the funding formula, which we have argued and battled against for many years and will do and continue to do, both myself as the Chief and also the Police and Crime Commissioner, you can see that the head of population cost for Cambridgeshire is just over £28. The highest in terms of this funding formula is Merseyside at just shy of £80. A considerable difference in the funding across policing across this country, and one which we see as unfair and unjust. All funding and grants and council tax put together puts Cambridgeshire as the 6th lowest funded force across the country, at just over £173 per head of population. Okay. Further to the operational context, on a more positive note, then the constabulary continues to be a growing organisation. The government 20,000 police officer national uplift, we have met and exceeded the target in terms of recruitment of police officers across this county in year one. By March 2021, we'll be on target to exceed the total of officers coming into this organisation. We've had our allocation for the following year up to March 2022, which will see a further 61 officers recruited into the organisation, and that's on top of normal recruitment. And then going forward into year 3 of the programme, an additional 82 officers are estimated by March 2023. I can give total reassurance that the number of applicants and the interest in joining the constabulary is still now as high as ever. The projected levels of leavers within the organisation in the next 12 months is 116. So you can see that with the uplift, with the replacement of projected leavers of 116 plus the uplift numbers, that could be seen as a challenge for the organisation. But I am more than confident that we will meet our full-time equivalent of just over 1,700 officers by March 2023, well in excess of that target. So over the last year, between March 2020 and November 2020, 102 new recruits have joined this organisation, 17 under the Police Now scheme, 14 transferees, which we've attracted from other forces, and over 23 specials. What's important with that projection of new officers joining is an important statistic, which I would like you to hold. And that's the length of service of everyday response officers responding to immediate and prompt and calls for service across this organisation. So the length of service, you may be interested to know, is that 60% of my response officers out on the streets of this county have less than 2 years service. And 74% of those response officers have less than 5 years service. This is an important statistic as I go on to explain the importance of sustainability and investment of what I'm looking for from the Police and Crime Panel and from the Commissioner. Just to give you other reassurance, it's not just about numbers, it's about the profile of the officers who join. And diversity and representation of the community is as, if not more important to me than just recruiting pure numbers. In March 2020, the percentage of joiners of female officers is now up just below 40%. And the joiners in terms of Black, ethnic and minority officers over the rolling 12 months is now up above 8%. When I reflect back to March 2018, just before I was appointed as chief, female percentage of officers stood at 30%, and Black and Asian and ethnic minorities stood at just under 3%. So it is of vital importance that we continue the diversity of the organisation. And again, an important factor to consider when I go on to outline my projections going forward. The 20,000 uplift context on the next slide, as I've said, is very welcome. We always receive and welcome additional officers that will support not only neighbourhood policing, response policing, but other areas of policing which goes on unforeseen to the public. However, the uplift programme, whilst funding direct costs of additional officers, is placing a strain on the organisation in terms of infrastructure. And although we were funded to a large degree around year one of that programme, the remaining 2 years of the national programme sees our funding allocation in terms of infrastructure decrease. And the other important aspect of the uplift programme is it does create budget inflexibility in terms of meeting the saving target. So I'm driven by increasing officer numbers, which as I've said and always will say is very welcome. But actually, when you look at 55% of my whole budget is direct support functions, then it does put a restriction on, I cannot reduce officer numbers in order to balance the budget. I'm tied by an uplift target, of which on the one hand, as I've said and repeatedly will say, is very welcome, but some inflexibility about how I balance the budget going forward. The next slide is just an outline in a sort of graphical term of that expenditure, from police officer costs to police staff costs, and as you can see, the 55% and 24% respectively gives a large proportion of my budget around people. And then it goes on around the OPCC, corporate costs, capital financing costs, which again, John will go out, will detail in far greater detail as we go through this presentation to become clearer. The next slide, I would like to just provide some background to how we've come to present this slide. And it may look complex, but I will try and guide you through it as best I can. First of all, having taken charge of the organisation back in 2018, I was very clear that we direct ourselves to a corporate plan, a vision of the organisation going forward that was both not only meet organisational and operational priorities in the here and now, but also provide sustainability for the future. So the corporate plan that myself and the team have built sets out the vision for the constabulary going forward based upon a number of factors. And it's built on 3 main pillars: operational priorities around safeguarding the vulnerable, combating inquisitive crime, reducing harm to our communities, tackling serious and organised crime, and improving public satisfaction are my 5 operational priorities going forward. Of course, you can't deliver operational priorities without the support of an infrastructure around organisational priorities, and there are 4 of those which provide the sustainability for the future. And they centre around my people, my partnerships, my resources, and importantly, the transformation of policing services as we go forward. And it's not just about the delivery, it's not just about how and what we deliver. Importantly, is how we do the job we do as policing through the values which run right the way through the organisation. And over the last 12 to 18 months, we've built the values of the organisation around integrity, impartiality, due diligence and fairness, the very values which every police officer signs up to on their attestation to the organisation. So having built that corporate plan and that vision for the future, it is about setting the operational context and the strategic threat and risk assessment as we go forward. And the triangle in front of your page details this in much greater depth. It centres on three aspects: the demand, both current and future, the resources of our workforce and our other assets, and importantly around the cost, the actual and predicted costs and pressures going forward. And we overlay those in the centre of our service delivery. What do we deliver? How do we structure ourselves going forward? And they centre on four service categories. And they, in brief, are central support services such as partnership, operations, organisational improvement, people and professionalism. They're around central operational services, mainly around high-level criminality, investigations, public protection, standards and authorities. Local policing, I'm sure dear to your heart as the actual police and crime panel and the communities who are viewing this briefing, around policing operations centred on 2 policing districts of North and South. And then finally centred upon shared support services of our infrastructure, our estates, our finance, our business support, our fleet and procurement. So we overlay the demand, cost and resources to centre on our focus of service delivery, which gives us the opportunities, the threats, as highlighted by the circle which surrounds that triangle. And around that circle describes in detail, as headlines, should I say, the threats to the organisation and the communities as we have gone forward. It is also important to say that this is not just about growth. This is about transformation of the assets and people that I have within the organisation. And from this process called the STRA process, then we've identified 4 quick wins, which we have done within existing resources and existing cost. They centre around continual professional development units. I asked you, if I may, to hold on to the statistic of the profile of response officers across the organisation of 60 and 74%. The CPDUs are vital in supporting those officers out on the front line, the frontline supervisors, to allow that visibility and increased police presence to be out there to the maximum. It also future-proofs the organisation around the police educational framework, which is the new recruitment profile and entry routes into the organisation, which come into existence within Cambridgeshire in October of this year. We saw during the pandemic and continue to see the drain upon resources, the issues around COVID, and the demand and extra demand that places on policing and other, of course, partner agencies. So command cells around tasking of neighbourhood officers, of response officers, of getting a state of the nation around resourcing, sickness, have been vitally important. And so 2 command cells have been built within existing resources of utilising my officers going forward. I will highlight to you, and it will be no surprise, that over 80 to 90% of investigations that my officers and staff face now have a digital footprint. And so aligning the cybercrime aspects of the organisation going forward is of vital importance. And we've done that under a newly formed cybercrime directorate, again, at no extra cost. And finally, neighbourhood support teams, 1 in the north, 1 in the south, of approximately 40 officers who support neighbourhood officers tackling issues from quality of life issues such as antisocial behaviour to the serious and organised criminality. And you may hopefully have seen some of the social media and news reports in recent days about the dismantling of several high-profile county lines within this county, and also keyless car thefts of significant proportion, especially in the north of the county, are some of the examples that I could quote around the success. So going forward, when we outline the circle of our pressures through the STRA process, comes on to the constabulary's response to mitigate those threats going forward. And I would like briefly to describe in brief terms 9 areas of investment and transformation which the precept will allow me to continue to do as we go forward. The first, as I highlighted on the first few slides about the vulnerability aspects of the organisation and the communities, of the increase in hidden demands such as domestic violence, child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation, modern day slavery, etc. And also against the backdrop of newly profiled officers, they need support, and they need support by a design concept of vulnerability support teams, supporting officers on the front line when people are brought into custody to exploit civil and other criminal protection orders to protect the organisation and to protect victims going forward in the area of vulnerability. The second element is around diversity coordinator. I've said about the steps we have made, not only to increase the numbers of officers across this organisation, but also the diversity of it. And pleasingly, the recruitment drive that we've instigated under the 20,000 Uplift programme has brought in diversity within the organisation, but there is still more work to be done. And I recognise that through our positive action team and the support a diversity and inclusion officer could provide. We see the demand within our control room ever increasing, not only in terms of traditional 999 calls and non-emergency calls, but also the concept of digital and social media interaction. Over the last 12 months, we've seen a 60% increase in web chats. We've seen a 12% increase in online reporting of crime across the organisation. And an interesting statistic is that 94% of people said that they would use that service again rather than traditional methods of actually telephoning and trying to get through to our control room. In addition to that, we have legislation which we have to comply with, which comes into effect this year, which means we have to respond to social media requests and tweets and Facebook messages and the alike in the same responsive manner as we do to normal traditional calls. And so the building of a social media desk and contact desk within the Demand Hub is of vital importance for our connection to the community and to build and increase our trust and confidence. I mentioned the realignment of officers and staff within the continual professional development units to support the young in service officers, but a growing gap there is within our HR. And so 2 HR professionals will be built within those units as we go forward, along with support for detective investigators. As you recognise from that circle on the previous slide, the detective resilience across the organisation, not just here in Cambridgeshire, but nationally, is under pressure. I mentioned the footprint of digital and technology footprint across all investigations that we investigate now as police, and digital media investigators are vital in the support going forward to all aspects of investigations. Not just in terms of expertise, not just in terms of advice, but also in terms of the growing complexity around ISO accreditation. We've also seen a shift in terms of our community safety and our prevention element of the organisation. We've seen dramatic decreases in traditional crime, but we have seen the exploitation of online scams, not only of importance to the Police and Crime Commissioner, of importance to myself, but also importance to our vulnerable communities across the county. And I'm sure we have seen on social media during the COVID sort of pandemic, the exploitation and creativity that these people prey upon vulnerable members of the community. And therefore building a cyber online prevention officers who go out to communities, who give advice in people's houses of profiles we receive from Action Fraud, for example, is of vital importance going forward. And finally, just to touch on the Covert Authorities Bureau, I mentioned serious and organised crime, but equally as important to tackling quality of life issues are the covert nature of our authorities that I grant and my staff grant in order to exploit all the criminal aspects that we can in order to prevent crime. And a growth within that bureau is required going forward. So that hopefully outlines how we have come, the context of the operational policing footprint, the successes we've had as an organisation, the demands and pressures that we've identified through an evidence-based built process, through developing our priorities operationally, organisationally, through the values, through the STRA process, which is, as Matt opened up this presentation, the evidence base, which leads us to the threats and pressures that the organisation faces. The way we've tried to mitigate those threats by the reorganisation of existing resources, but recognise it in the slide that you have before you, the pressures that we face going forward and the transformation that I need to employ across the constabulary to ensure that this remains one of the safest counties in the country. So at this point, I will just hand over to John, who then goes through in more detail the medium-term financial plan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Fairly seamless, there, I'm sure you'll appreciate. So thank you, Chief. And I think sort of when we came and sort of had this session a year ago, we were in the position then of presenting a budget that balanced in 2021, but with significant funding gaps from 2021 to 2022 onwards. So in effect, funding gaps for the rest of that medium-term financial plan. So I think sort of from that was a catalyst sort of within the organisation, certainly to escalate the financial sort of position that we've got and sort of building that much more closely into our business planning processes, as the Chief has articulated. So that journey for us really did begin back in February, March. As soon as we set the budget for the current year, we moved forward with the financial planning for 2021-22 and the medium-term financial planning period. So where we are today, that work has progressed. We are in a position today, subject to precept recommendations, etc., of being able to present a balanced budget for next financial year, so 21-22 and 22-23, based on the currently known assumptions that we've got. However, we do still have funding gaps in years 3 and 4 of the medium-term plan. So very much in terms of what we're looking at with the financial plan and the process is, I think, as the Acting Commissioner mentioned early on, is around financial sustainability and making sure that we are putting ourselves as an organisation in the most financially stable position going into what is a fairly tumultuous time with the economy and the financial climate within which we're operating within. Matt mentioned earlier about the robustness of estimates in terms of balancing the budget and also having adequate reserves. Being members of other public sector organisations, you'll be fully aware that is a statutory requirement on those organisations, as it is upon us, to make sure that we have got sort of the right robustness of estimates and reserves in terms of the financial planning that we've got. And obviously, I don't need to talk to you about sort of Section 114 notices that we have seen across the public sector and how sort of damaging they can be in terms of service provision, etc. And really what we're doing here is setting this financial plan to make sure that we have got that financial sustainability going forward for the constabulary. So just moving on, the next slide is just a graphical presentation really in terms of how the funding pressures, the unavoidable costs, and also the investment that the Chief talked about in order to deliver the uplift and the infrastructure that goes behind the scenes in terms of supporting those frontline officers is made up of. So overall, there's £14.2 million worth of growth and investment and cost pressures that we need to manage within the budget, offset by £5.1 million of efficiencies, which bring that down to a net movement on the budget of £9.1 million. With a net budget requirement, as it states there, of £161.6 million. The pie chart that you've got in front of you now just articulates the £14.2 million growth and the parts of the organisation within which that falls. Starting probably on the top left of that pie chart with the funding changes, the purple section that's there with £3.4 million. That is largely presentational in terms of the way that the funding for the Uplift programme is flowing through to us as a police force and every other police force. By way of the current financial year, there was a much larger proportion in terms of ring fence funding associated with the police Uplift programme. That's now moved into a core grant with a much smaller element of ring fence funding, which has then had an impact through into 21-22 as well. So largely a presentational technical change that we've had to build into the budget there on the funding side. In terms of the blue, the larger segment on the right-hand side, £5.3 million there is the constabulary, what we refer to as the in-force cost pressures and growth, largely associated with pay inflation, totaling £1.4 million across officers and staff. It is true the Chancellor announced pay freeze. That pay freeze comes into effect from September 2021 for the police. So therefore, we do have a part-year effect in terms of pay inflation, which is built into the budget, as well as increasing pension costs by the increase in number of police officers that are joining the organisation. Also built into the £5.3 million is an addition to the overtime budget. There is a continual need to provide overtime to make sure that we've got service provision on the front line, and we've seen that pressure escalate during the current times in terms of COVID and maintaining service continuity through that process as well. We've also got in that sort of £5.3 million the investment required to meet the strategic threats and risks that we've picked up through the STRA process and the business planning process that the Chief has outlined there, in terms of those 9 priority areas in terms of managing those immediate risks. So they are accounted for within the budget estimates that you've got in front of you. And also the provision for the full uplift in terms of cost of the officers for the full year 1 of the uplift. The funding comes through and the cost comes through. As you can appreciate, the take up of police officers doesn't come through all in one go at the 1st of April. It obviously gradually steps up throughout the year as the recruitment processes happen. So there's an element to reflect the full year cost of that year 1 of the uplift programme in the budget as well. If I move next to the green segment on the left-hand side, £3.1 million there in terms of our collaborated functions. So we have a number of collaborated units within the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire collaboration in terms of the 3 police forces there. We also have a regional collaboration within the Eastern region, and we also capture in here national collaborations where we have national police programmes and initiatives as well.
Mike Shillams.
Okay, so I think in terms of where we are there, we have got pay inflation, we've got ICT cost of £500,000 coming through in terms of maintaining the systems and security of those systems and making sure that they're up to date, as well as the rollout of Microsoft 365 licenses and so on. We also have initiatives around the professional police education quality framework. Again, is driving additional cost as a national initiative that we need to pick up and budget for locally as well. And then just some of the regional and national initiatives as well within there around the Eastern Regional Serious and Organised Crime Unit that needs to be picked up, as well as national ICT costs as well. And I'll come on to say a little bit more about some of those things shortly as well. And then the final area of the slide is the red segment at the bottom, which is labelled here as OPCC costs, £2.4 million, but in effect, the entirety of that is linked to the capital financing requirement that we do have now within the constabulary that is hitting the revenue budget. The funding for capital that comes through to constabulary is £0.1 million on £165 million funding settlement. So a very, very minimal amount. So in effect, what that is doing is pushing any capital financing costs into our revenue account and into the revenue budget. And that is largely what you'll see in there is in terms of increasing MRP and interest costs, where we're having to plan for borrowing, as well as additional revenue contributions to capital. And that is exacerbated in particular where we have short life assets such as ICT investments, which are written down over a period of 3 to 5 years, as opposed to property investments over a 40-year period as well. So as the highlights on the kind of growth that's in the budget, the constabulary has then continued through the STRA process and through its regional collaborated units to drive savings and efficiencies, which have totaled 5.1 million, as I previously outlined. Starting with the BCA's collaborated function there, we have delivered a share of £1.1 million by holding those collaborated units much more to task in terms of their budget setting arrangements. We've got more work to do in that space as we go forward, but there's £1 million benefit that is coming back to the constabulary through the work that's been done there, particularly around HR transformation costs, as well as ICT savings as well. And I think just to point out here, whilst that £1 million is coming to Cambridgeshire, that's a third of the overall savings that have been delivered within the collaborated units. Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire similarly get a share of the savings that are identified. So actually the real level of savings achieved within those collaborated units is much greater. We also have a £500,000 saving associated with a change in the funding model associated with the National Police Air Service. So the helicopters that you may from time to time see flying around the county helping to deal with crime. With the national approach there and discussions and negotiations within the region have enabled us to deliver a £500,000 saving in respect of that service as well. A small segment here on the red is where we have been able to deliver some savings around MRP and interest by increasing in-year revenue contributions to capital to avoid and reduce the extent of our capital borrowing going forward. But as you would perhaps expect, the largest section here on the pie chart demonstrates that the largest savings are being delivered within the force and through the work that the chief and the chief officer team have done through the STRA process and that business planning. So just to kind of highlight within there, you will be familiar with the local policing model change in terms of delivering the savings there to enable the threat, risk and harm to be sort of built into the budget and to deal with those threats and risks in terms of the transformation of the organisation. The STRA process is delivering £350,000 within there, largely through non-pay savings as well as demand hub relocation savings. And then we've also got some other non-pay savings around contractual arrangements that we've been able to deliver savings against as well, going through there. But those delivery of savings is key. Our external audit reports do make reference in our value for money judgments about delivering on our savings plans. So that is a critical area for the organisation in terms of demonstrating its going concern and also in terms of the value for money judgment that the auditors look at as part of the year-end accounts as well. So the next slide, just moving on, just presenting the net position there across the different areas of expenditure within the budget. I probably won't dwell on this slide too much. Overall, sort of that article equates to the £9.1 million net growth and investment, which we are setting out in terms of the increased funding settlement, as well as the proposal in respect of the precept. So just moving on, capital requirements. I've already touched on this. The capital funding is very limited for all police forces across the country. So in effect, like I say, that is forcing capital cost into the revenue account that we are having to deal with. There is no way around that in reality. So we are seeing increases in borrowing that we will need to undertake, as well as those revenue contributions to capital. The capital programme is set out in the capital strategy that is appended to the medium-term financial strategy. So the full detail of the capital programme is contained within there, but the main schemes that you'll see within there are articulated on the slide there. The Cambridge Southern Police Station is budgeted for at the moment within those numbers. We are currently at planning, still awaiting a decision in respect of that. So we clearly had to build that into the capital programme whilst we await that kind of outcome as well. There are other major operational requirements and facilities that we need to deliver in terms of the training facilities across, again, our BCH collaboration, as well as the need to update beyond life, in effect, police firing range to deliver our training in that for that unit and that service as well. And like I say, the ICT infrastructure, as you can probably imagine, continues to be a key draw on the capital requirements. And I think at this point, that final bullet point around the Emergency Services Network National Programme. So this is a replacement for the Emergency Services Network, the airways, radios, etc. that the police use, ambulance use and fire use. There's a national programme that is based on the current information that we have, likely to cost the constabulary somewhere in the region of £5 to £6 million in the medium term period that we've got, likely to hit in 22, 23 and 23, 24. So again, that is another key driver in terms of the capital requirements that the constabulary has upon it, which to a large extent is out of our hands. And we're doing some work as well with other forces within the region and nationally, and it is an issue that exists in all police force budgets at the moment. So we again are budgeting for that in the capital programme, and therefore the revenue consequence of that. So just moving on quickly then to the funding settlement and the funding side of things. I think it's fair to say that we probably have got a more positive settlement than we expected. It still is only a one-year settlement, which continues to make the financial planning in the longer term difficult, but you can appreciate that from your other public sector body involvement as well. It's the same across the board. We did get a flat cash settlement, but as you'll see in a slide shortly over the page, is that we have had an increase in our core grant because of the police uplift funding. Other grants are held at 2021 levels. I won't go into the capital grant again, but there is also the ability within the settlement to raise the policing element of the precept by £15. And again, for reference for the committee discussions with other forces in the region, there's 7 in the Eastern region, and 6 out of those 7 forces are similarly looking at using the maximum amount of precepts in terms of that increase as well, for similar reasons as we've outlined here today. So this table is just setting out the funding settlement. What you can see here is some of the change in the core grant funding in the top line, some of the reduction in the uplift ring fence of £0.7 million there compared to the current year, which gives us an overall increase of core funding of £4.2 million. That does equate to Cambridgeshire's funding share of the additional £415 million that has gone in relation to year 2 of the police uplift programme. And then just moving on, when we start to include, again, based on the £14.94 increase, precept funding of £72.4 million, the total revenue grant funding there of £92.7 million, giving us total funding of £165.1 million for 21-22. And I think importantly here as well, just to draw out, is the note, the second note there, which refers to increase in the general fund reserve, as well as the starting to put an earmarked reserve aside for the emergency services network and the additional cost that we're expecting in relation to that initiative. The general fund reserve is currently being diluted as the net budget requirement increases year on year. We have a requirement in effect to hold that general fund at a prudent level, which is deemed to be 5% in consultation with our external auditors. So as the net budget has increased in recent years, we haven't been in a position to be able to increase that general fund reserve. So again, when we talk about planning for financial sustainability, there is an element there in terms of topping up the general fund reserve as well. So probably pass, I suppose whilst I'm on the reserves position, I might as well go on to the next slide before just passing back to the Chief on the ongoing developments and risks. So just on the reserves, I've mentioned the general fund position there, and also starting to set aside an additional earmarked reserves around the emergency services network. We are in the current year looking at reserves realignment as well. So where some of the earmarked reserves, the risks around those have diminished, and we've seen new risks come in around the uplift programme, around transformation that the Constabulary may need to undertake, that we are setting aside additional earmarked reserves through realignment within the appendix that you've got there in the medium-term financial strategy. I think the final point I just made reference to is the additional funding stream that we as a constabulary have got, along with local government and fire as well, around the local council tax support grant. So this is a one-off grant that is coming in order to support the local council tax schemes and those households that are finding it more difficult to sort of meet their council tax bills, which manifests itself in collection fund deficits and so on. So that grant will be passed straight through to, again, the balance sheet in terms of reserve and held to meet the shortfall in respect of collection fund deficits that are being written down over 3 years. And any headroom will be there for discussion with the Commissioner in terms of how they may see fit to use that money going forward into 21-22. So that was it in terms of my highlights on the financial side. So probably just to step back a slide for the Chief to talk about the ongoing developments and risks.
So I've just got one slide, Matt. Rather than change the name, it's back to myself, the Chief. This slide just really, and I won't go through all those bullet points, but this just goes through, just reinforces the position that John has just outlined, that many of the cost pressures going forward are of national programmes, Home Office programmes, national programmes, pressures upon national police chiefs in order to deliver national programmes right across the country, of which we have little or very little control of. And just to highlight some of them, the pensions liability, we spoke earlier, and John highlighted the balanced budget which we project through the next 2 years of the 4-year medium-term financial strategy. But within years 3 and 4 of that, the pensions liability does hit police as well as other public sectors, of which is a considerable strain upon our budget. We mentioned the police educational qualification framework, which hits Cambridgeshire in October 2021 this year. Again, just some reassurance to the panel that we not only looked across Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire, but also across the region, across the 7 Force Eastern region, in order to get alignment and the best deal with our academic provider, the Anglia Ruskin University. We mentioned the steps that I and my Chief Officer team and the whole organisation has taken to reduce down the costs of the National Police Air Service and look to make nearly £500,000 saving out of that going forward. The emergency services network, the replacement for Airwave, has been articulated fully by John, and the £5 million estimated capital cost on the organisation. And then we go into various acronyms, which I know we all love, but they mainly concern, just to wrap that up, around ICT, around the digital programme, around the law enforcement data programme, which is a replacement for the PNC and the like. Single Online Home is the common platform which we will take in autumn 2021 this year, around the ability of people to log on anywhere and then go into our digital services. We have seen, or you may be aware of, the destabilisation around the forensics market and the national programme led by Dorset Police around transforming forensics, of which we are heavily involved in going forward. I've already mentioned the increases in the digital footprint around cybercrime, and additionally the serious and organised crime element. The serious and organised crime review commissioned by the Home Office is due to report, which will see pressures and uplift within the serious and organised crime regional assets, URSU, of which we are a key element of it. So this just gives you a flavour of the national programmes, government initiatives, direction of travel, of which we have to be a part of. We have to have, and we do have a seat at the table, but many of those costs come out of our control within the remit of just Cambridgeshire Constabulary on its own. So I think that concludes the presentation from myself and John from the Constabulary's element. I'll now hand back to either Matt or probably Jim in terms of taking us through the last few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Jim Haylett here. So I'll just take us through the precept slides. So unfortunately, I can't see the slides, although I do have them separately in front of me. So if we could move on, please, to the precept survey slide. So there is a full report of this in the pack. So these are just some highlights. So we received the settlement from the government on the 17th of December, at which point, obviously, there were some detailed discussions between the Commissioner and the Chief and both teams as regards to what the implications of the settlement was, including the expectations from government in terms of the various aspects of the settlement. The Commissioner's office then developed a number of narratives to go with the survey, so basically different levels of detail that people could access. And then the survey was launched on the 15th of January to run until the 19th. And obviously, due to COVID restrictions, that was an online survey, which, as my scanning around the country, seems to have been the norm from most PCC's offices. There was extensive circulation, and again, the list is in the full survey report, but press release circulated to yourselves via ECOPS, where there's 20,000 subscribers, circulated to hard to reach groups, social media, and through our partnership network, amongst others. So if I could have the next slide, please, Matthew, and that's the precept response. So there were 1,270 responses compared to just under 1,200 last year. And of those, 70%, slightly over, agreed that an additional £1.25 per month for a Band D property was value for money. And there is a small table there with a breakdown of all respondents in terms of the areas where people responded from. And again, much more detail in terms of demographic detail is contained in the survey report. What the report also alludes to is that we did ask for a number of other questions that weren't related directly to the precept in terms of what policing priorities members of the public had. And the purpose of that is both to inform any future police and crime plan, but also will be passed to the constabulary in terms of to improve their understanding as well of what the concerns in different parts of the county are. So if I could then have the next slide, please, which is the 21-22 precept recommendation. So based on the outcome of the consultation undertaken and the medium-term financial plan requirement to meet the operational requirements, the identified strategic threats and risks, to continue to deliver the uplift programme, to deliver the capital requirements, and also to enhance the financial sustainability of the constabulary over the medium term, the Commissioner has proposed that a £14.94 per annum increase in precept for a Band D property is made for 21-22. And the final slide is just a comparison of last year and this year. So if I could just hand back to the Commissioner for conclusion, please.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to thank the Chief Constable, John, Matthew and Jim for this presentation. But the first duty in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act is for the Commissioner to secure the maintenance of the police force in that area. Apart from thinking about the yearly budget, which isn't just a month or a 2-month project, it's an ongoing thing that goes on from as soon as the budget is announced and we've got the precept. It continues on right the way through the year. Conversations are had all the time. And I have to take into consideration the long-term perspective rather than just one that might be expedient in the short term. This means that at times difficult and unpopular decisions have to be made, and this is something that the members of the panel will be acutely aware of in respect of their council areas. We will come out of COVID, and the constabulary needs to be in a strong position to respond to the public when we do. It has been a hard year, and yes, we are still in it, but as I say, we will come out of it. There are financial pressures over the course of the financial plan. I cannot ignore them, as that would just store up the problems for the future and the next commissioner. In proposing the precept, there are an awful lot of considerations. The government expectations, they have additionally funded the uplift, yes, and we applaud that. However, we need to fund the rest. The needs and recommendations of the various inspectorates, together with the improvements and developments identified within the constabulary through the STRA process. Public views. I know it's difficult for many. I know that COVID has made the situation worse, but just over 70% of all replies to my survey were supportive. The Chief's views. The Chief has a strong senior team, collectively, they have put in place a rigorous business plan that balances risk, service and costs. The future challenges and risks that the constabulary faces, not least the growing population and a funding formula that doesn't reflect this. It's one that I've been fighting for and will continue to fight for, that we get a better funding formula. I also take into account the views of other bodies that look in great depth at the constabulary, such as the external audit. So I do not propose this rise lightly, but in all good consciousness, I cannot leave this office knowing that I have not done what I can to provide the best police service possible for Cambridgeshire and the community. So thank you very much.
You're on mute, Edward.
Thank you very much, Acting Commissioner. So before I invite panel members to ask questions, I just want to focus our attention on the purpose of this meeting, which is to decide whether to support the Commissioner's recommendation for a £15 a year increase in council tax for a Band D property. And that our questioning should be to try and identify the evidence supporting that decision to allow us to take a vote on whether we support it or not. We have the power to veto the decision if 9 members vote against it. So over to panel members who would like to start with questions. Councillor Massey.
I have quite a few comments, questions, so please do bear with me. And if at any point you want me to break it down, would that be easier for me to break it down, Commissioner?
Yeah, I think if you break it down to one at a time, maybe better.
Well, if I sort of group into like 3 for just time wise, just because I am concerned that the length of the presentation has gone on for an hour and 10, and I don't want to have an hour and 10 of me speaking. So it would be, I think maybe we need to think about how better to present the reports in a better time. I think maybe for future that would be a consideration. But thank you very much for the presentation and the reports. There's a lot of reading that we've all had to do. And I think it's really important to point out that it's really sad that vital and key and core services are having to have a discussion about making savings because of the fact of underfunding. And this is
I'm sorry, Edward, I can't hear anymore.
Yeah, it seems that Councillor Massey's connection has frozen. Councillor Massey, if you can hear us, we'll come back to you. I'll pass over to Councillor Daunton and we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Edward. I have a number of questions, but I think I'll take them one by one or two by two. Likewise, I found the presentation very good, but really rather long, especially as it overlapped with the papers that we were presented with. So actually, my first question is to do with the papers, and I just hope, and it was very good to have all the detail, but I hope in future that we can have it in a way that is more digestible and in a consistent format, and perhaps with some summary material. That's one point. My second point really is a very general point in terms of the risk management. So this time last year, we were asked to agree to an increase to a precept. I think it was 4.6 or 4.7. And that was needed in order to provide a balanced budget. But then not so long ago, we found that we were faced with a cut of 1.7 million. So could I have some reassurance that sufficient risk is built into what we're being provided with today? I have other questions, but I'll come back to them later. Thank you.
Thank you. The reason for the report is to give you as much information as possible, and that's why we hold the pre-briefing that we offered to the panel beforehand, so you can see this and understand it and ask questions in a few weeks, I think it's a few days ago or a week ago. So that was the reason for that. But it is important that the panel members understand all the background to this. So that's why we do it. As far as the 1.7, I think I would ask if I can hand over to Matt for that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Actually, I'm going to ask the Chief Constable to come in there because it's around neighbourhood policing. So I think it's worth Chief Constable Nick Dean just responding.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, an important question. And just to give reassurance that the sustainability and the risks have been fully considered. As Matt opened up the presentation, then the detail around the process to come to the presentation today has been well evidenced and well researched, and over a number of months from the last precept panel, we begin planning for the next year. But the cuts you refer to of 1.7 million relate to the cuts I announced and the change in neighbourhood policing model just prior to Christmas. Really, those are necessary in order to build sustainability going forward. So, as I've always said, that the history behind Cambridgeshire, and absolutely no criticism to any of predecessors here, is the fact that we built the budget based upon a budget asset reserve, but that's just simply not sustainable. And so looking forward with my team to build in that medium-term financial strategies, to build in plans now, and appreciate they may well be you could term unpalatable to the community, but to build in those cuts and that transformation and an ability to transform the organisation now builds in that sustainability for the future. And of course, we can give absolutely no categoric assurances going forward, because we, as John articulated, this is based upon a one-year funding formula. We have cried out for a number of years for a more sustainable and a more projected budget going forward, based upon, as you would on any organisation, to go forward over 3 to 4 years funding, that you could then start to really do some detailed planning going forward. But the assumptions we make at this particular time are based upon a one-year settlement, which were given from the government, and quite understandable in terms of that, given the backdrop of the economy, the COVID and the global pandemic. But to answer your questions in short, yes, the reassurance around risk is built in detail to these plans.
Thank you.
Councillor Daunton, do you want to?
Well, yes, I would just quickly, if that's fine with you, Chairman. So I think in part what you're saying, Chief Constable, and thank you very much for the very clear answer. I think in part what you're saying is that there isn't sufficient government funding, and you mentioned that in in the presentation showing how low down Cambridgeshire is in the table. So, I mean, really, what more can we do to fight that corner? And what more can we do to make sure that our increase in population is fully recognised and fully funded? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that, and also to hear the thoughts of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
So thank you. I can rest assured that a number of lobbies have gone in on all sides, from both myself as a Chief Constable, my colleagues across the country as Chief Constables, and also Police and Crime Commissioners and successive Crime Commissioners over the years. We do have the support of our local MPs. We do have a direct link in, as we always have done, in a very good relationship, I have to say, with the current Home Secretary and Policing Minister. And I think they are, undoubtedly well aware of the unfairness of an historic policing funding formula, which is built on not only historic census data, but also built upon different elements of the demographics and the makeup of the county. And as you quite rightly highlight, Cambridgeshire is a growing county, not only in population, but investment, in economy, in transformation, in scientific services. I could go on. And I think a fairer funding formula, it has to reflect different criteria in order to make it fairer for keeping the communities of this county safe. So, anything that the Police and Crime panel can do within their power or their lobbying ability would be most welcome and have my support, and I'm sure the Police and Crime Commissioner's support. But I can assure you that we have lobbied hard for that change in funding formula. It was close to being changed a few years ago, and I have to be pragmatic in an acceptance of, given the pressures of Brexit, of COVID, and all the other pressures which are nationally being driven here, then policing and the policing funding formula may not be top of the government's priority at this particular time. But we continue, and we will continue to lobby hard. I'm not sure whether the Police and Crime Commissioner has anything further to add.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the Chief said a lot of it. It is about this funding system, which has been there for many years. And only today, just before this meeting, I was talking to the Police and Crime Minister, and there were all the parties of all the commissioners there, and they were all asking for a better funding system. We all have similar problems, we all have similar risks, and it's only through a new funding formula that takes into account everything and all the changes, including our area is one of the highest growth in population. We need that funding. We need it to be at a better level for us so that we can do more and actually not have to keep going to the community. But at the moment, this is a funding formula that is in place, and we have to lobby. And I am thoroughly behind you as a panel. If you wish to do it, I will back you to ensure this is happening. I know councils are asking for a better funding formula, and we have had the MPs and everybody else on our behalf trying to fight our corner for a better funding. So thank you very much for that question.
Oh, thank you. Chairman, just to point out to you that it seems Councillor Massey's back in now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think maybe the panel would like to discuss this, not now, but at a later date, how we might help lobby for a better funding formula, and how we could perhaps assemble a coalition to help lobby for that. So returning to Councillor Massey, sorry we lost you.
Sorry about that. It appears that when your computer wants to update, it really wants to update. And if you don't, it kicks you out. So one computer updating, and now that's why I'm on the iPad. Thank you for giving me the chance to come back again. And thank you as well, Councillor Daunton, for your question on the precinct, where I just got the end of there, and for the answers from the Chief Constable and the acting Commissioner. I think just to confirm that my concerns is that year after year we are back again asking for yet more money from the public to go into rather empty pockets at this moment in time, given where we are with the COVID situation. Many people have lost their jobs, my son included, and many people have got a lot less money than they had previously, and although we might be coming out of COVID at some point in the future, the impact is still going to be felt by the public for years to come before we can actually recover. And I think my concern is that it's not just the police that will be asking for more money. The government is now allowing the county council to increase its precept for social care, again going back to the public, to ask the public to fill that gap in funding, which is a vital and core service. And as well as the districts are also allowed to increase their precept should they wish to. And I think this increase, the added increase to the public, is really going to squeeze a lot of people. And I will note that there's been £1 million added to the pot in consideration of the amount of people that's going to need help for council tax. But I think from the government, that's a bit of a backward step, isn't it? It's like saying, well, we know people are going to suffer, so we're going to give £1 million to help with the suffering, but that's not going to cover the complete deficit, which is why they're allowing us to have 3 years to look at how we're going to cover that deficit. It's just kind of a bit backwards, and to say the very least in that. And not only that, of course, the increase in council tax support will be well in excess of that. That is going to be falling back to the councils to fulfil that gap. And then we always have quite a degree of uncollected council tax. And I think that's just going to increase as well. So that's not people who said that they need to have help and therefore they have funding to help with council tax. This is people who just haven't been able to pay full stop. And we've not been able to collect that money. And that's just a massive gap. So for me, there's a huge concern in regards to the preset. I think year after year, we are back again and we're talking about fairer funding. And it was really good actually to hear from the Commissioner to say that it was only recently that he's had a conversation in regards to the fairer funding. But my question is, it's not about fairer funding for the rest of the UK. My concern is the fairer funding for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Sorry, somebody's at the door. And we really do need to have a very, very strong voice with this. And I would hope to have had this done years ago. I'd like to understand why we nearly got there in recent years and we didn't quite get there at all. We're still here. So what can the panel do? So going back to what the chair's question was what can we do as a panel? What should we do as a panel? We do need to write a letter.
So is that the end of your question?
I think we lost you for a moment there, Councillor Massing.
Yes, I'm back.
Given we are running a little behind time, so can you try and wrap up?
Yes, should I try and, okay, so that's that bit on there. I've got a few questions in regards to other bits. So first of all, I hope you heard me talk about the partnership working and the fact that the community safety team is being removed. I think is a negative step towards partnership working. On page 34, we're talking about supporting staff, which I think is really important. It's very important we support all of our staff, and it's highlighted that we have a young staff force, and so that we're needed to do something to help them with a professional development unit. However, I do also note by cutting the number of experienced PCSOs in half, you've lost a lot of officers, which may be used in this partnership professional development unit. Did you get that? Because you froze.
Yeah, you did break up, but I think we got it.
Okay. And again, I welcome the cybercrime unit. I think that's great. I have a question about what is the positive action team, because it's not properly referenced. And couldn't this be the actual existing community safety team? Couldn't they just be moved into a different name, so to speak? And I also have questions in regards to the uplift programme, just to highlight that in the past I have had concerns that the uplift programme, although it increases the number of police officers, that there is an additional cost which falls to the constabulary, and that is pointed out again in the paperwork. And I think that's it.
Thank you. I think I do recognise all the other elements that you say where they're going to potentially raise the precept, but I can only deal with what's in front of me, which is the police element. And this is required to ensure that our community is staying safe. And yes, I think you, as a panel, you were informed last year by myself about this, and I would have liked to have seen you do something over the last year in relation to talking to the government, sending letters, discussing with MPs about getting a fair funding. But we are where we are at the moment, and at the moment the issue is the precept that I'm putting in front of you, because of what's happened with the community over the last while. As we see, and the Chief has alluded to, crime is constantly changing, and the force has to change with it. And yes, we have a young force, but the force are putting, through the Chief Constable and his team, are putting things in place. As far as the PCSOs are concerned, if I can hand over to the Chief, please.
Hi, Councillor Massey. Thanks for the questions. First of all, just reassurance: it's not removal of the whole community safety team. It's 6 officers of community safety officers. The community safety team covers a much wider remit. The opportunities for those 6 police staff to be redeployed within the organisation through the proposals I put forward are there, and I can confirm that a number of those community safety officers have been have taken opportunity to be redeployed within the organisation, and indeed, if we are successful at the precept bid, then that will provide another opportunity for one of those community safety officers to be retained with their skills and knowledge. But as I said, in terms of community safety, the paradigm has shifted from traditional acquisitive crime onto the digital platform, which is where cyber online prevention officers come to the fore. And my plan is to introduce 4 of those officers across the organisation. With regards to the continual professional development units and the reduction in PCSOs, then the PCSOs could not be deployed within the professional development unit. One, they don't have the knowledge. They couldn't provide the guidance to regular officers. They just do not have the powers or that ability to deploy to give frontline advice to regular constables. However, the police and community support officers, as with anyone I've put at risk, have the opportunity to take advantage of the police uplift programme, of the allocation that we've received here in Cambridgeshire, and a number of those PCSOs have applied to become regular constables. And my commitment, as I think I described at the pre-brief, and I have certainly done and re-emphasised within my briefings to those people, to those PCSOs, both on a virtual meeting where I addressed the organisation and on a one-to-one basis with a number of those PCSOs, is my commitment is, if they are successful as officers and transfer across to be regular officers, they will be redeployed back into the communities of which they were police community support officers. As I see that their knowledge, their skills, their community contact is vital to build up community safety and neighbourhood policing, which I hope the panel will acknowledge my commitment to that agenda of policing. And finally, in terms of positive action is around diversity. It's around the inclusion of the organisation, seeking people within minority groups across this county and beyond to enter the organisation, to add to and to reflect the communities of which we serve. So the inclusion coordinator will work actively with the positive action team within the organisation to increase the diversity, not only in terms of attraction and application, but also mentoring and retention within the organisation as they progress through their police or police staff careers. So I hope that sort of answers some of the questions around the neighbourhood policing changes.
Chair, can I quickly come back? Is that okay? So I think that it really is having the diversity coordinator. It really is welcome, and I think it would be good if they were empowered with policy as well, and perhaps reporting directly to you, and also in regards to how they would work with the community.
I think, Councillor Massey, we're straying outside the remit of this committee.
Okay. I do have some questions quickly on on some of the figures. So on page 58 on Appendix C, when we're talking about the crime reduction projects, it's 50,000 per year, but only for 3 years, while some of the others is for 5. So my question is why? The other question about police overtime is how much of it is actually needed if we're going to get more police? That's the other question. And then going on to Appendix 2 on the capital budget, on page 16, we're talking about £100,000 set aside for Cambridge Police Station. And so I've got a number of points on this. First of all, it's a low amount. Second of all, what are the assumptions made in relation to that amount? What are the timescales for this? And where's the consultation? Thank you.
Chairman Edward, I would ask if John could deal with those figures, or Matthew, please.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Mass, can I just check the crime reduction projects? Was it the 500,000 that you were referring to there?
Could be 500,000,
yeah,
but my handwriting's quite a
Yeah, sure. Okay. So in terms of the crime reduction projects, there's 500,000 currently in the budget around, I would say, crime production and prevention that the constabulary will work across with the OPCC in terms of developing initiatives to help reduce crime and kind of take that early intervention and proactive approach. So in terms of where we are with that, we're holding that revenue budget in the revenue account for the first 2 years of the MTFP, as you can see there on that Appendix C. However, as we've articulated earlier on, we have got funding gaps in years 3 and 4. So those funding gaps are 3.7 million and 4.2 million based on current assumptions. So at the moment, what the proposal and the plan is within the medium-term financial plan period is to remove the revenue budget, but to create a revolving earmarked reserve fund, which you can see in the reserve forecast that's also in the MTFS document Appendix E. So within there, you can see the crime and reduction prevention reserve kicking in 23-24, in effect to compensate, moving that into an earmarked reserve that will be topped up as it's utilised, if you like. So hopefully that deals with that question. In terms of the city centre police station, I won't go into too much detail at this stage. We are still looking at options across public sector as well as private sector in terms of what that looks like. I think the Chief will reiterate the commitment we have is still there and clearly is there, it's not gone away, to maintain that city centre police station in terms of the neighbourhood policing team. The £100,000 in there at the moment is an assumption around a remodelling of a premises that we may be able to secure in the city centre, although we don't know what and where that premises will be as yet. So we're currently going through that kind of process, if you like, in tandem whilst the Milton scheme is at planning. Obviously, the two are separate but interlinked and interdependent. And there will be a sort of internal meeting in terms of the evaluation of those criteria. And I think we obviously will come out and engage with the public around what our preferred option is when we get to that stage. I think we were anticipating perhaps being out sooner than we are at the moment with this one, but I think in terms of where we are, it's likely to run probably into April, May, subject to where the PCC elections land. So hopefully that's covered those points for you.
Councillor Massey, you happy with that? Okay. Moving on to Councillor Lynn.
Thank you. I took over the role from Fenland District Council as the portfolio holder for community safety on the 21st of January. The first email I got was based around the PCC cutting the funding to the CSP, the Community Safety Partnership in Fenland. So today I'm here to obviously vote on behalf of Fenland whether I think an increase in precept is the right way to go, and to put it onto the community in Fenland's pocket rather than central government, where I believe it belongs. So what I would like to know is, if I agree to this precept, and with the funding being removed for Fenland, does that mean that the police are going to take over them responsibilities of the Community Safety Partnership to cover what is going to be lost through the reduction of the funding, please?
This is totally separate to the precept. There is money being put aside that the CSPs will be able to bid for, but that is totally separate to this precept.
Well,
thank you.
Well, in Appendix C, it is, but it has been budgeted. It says community safety crime reduction grants, and it has been budgeted for the next 4 years as part of this budget.
It's a new way that we're looking at making this budget work in a better way for the community. So instead of doing smaller things, it's about doing larger things together. So you'll hear more about that later.
I think my point is that with that being cut, it's obviously going to remove a service. It's going to remove services from the people in Fenland that we are now asking to give more money to. So I think that, you know, I'm sure the people of Fenland would like to sort of hear how that is going to affect them.
Thank you. It is going to be a totally different way of working. We have to improve. It's about transformation, and the CSPs will get to hear about it. But if I can just hand over to Jim, please.
Yeah, just for context, the crime and disorder reduction grants that were allocated historically to each of the CSPs was in the region of £24,000 a year. And they were specifically allocated for improvement in the way that the services are delivered, rather than to fund a post or anything like that. The fact of the matter is the cumulative amount across the county is 150,000. And historically, there's been quite a lot of administrative bureaucracy around managing those six £24,000 grants. So the money is still there for the CSPs, but what we're looking at is a better way that we can have county-wide impact on crime and disorder reduction, and in ways whereby the improvements that get made through that are sustainable. So we obviously have a new commissioner coming in May, and by allocating all of that money now, that would restrict that commissioner's opportunity to progress their new police and crime plan, because obviously we know we are still working with what is quite an old police and crime plan. But I'm quite happy to forward a more detailed response to the councillor to explain that. So this is not removing the money from CSPs. This is part of a dialogue with them that we started back towards the end of last year in terms of better ways of utilising that money with them.
Thank you. Commissioner, can you give us some idea what the timescale is for a report detailing this new approach? Is that going to be before the next election?
I think that will be reported with the new commissioner. So the new commissioner, whoever that is in May, will be reporting on that. So it's to allow that commissioner to see what funding is there and how best that funding can actually be utilised to improve the situation, as Jim said, county-wide. So it's up to the new commissioner, and I don't want to make any kind of decision that is going to tie the hands of a new commissioner for the next 12 months.
But will there be, I guess what we're trying to hone in on, will there be continuity of funding before that decision is made, or will the funding be withdrawn from the beginning of the next financial year?
I'll hand back again to Jim so he can explain a little bit more.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. The last round of awards for this were done on a 2-year basis, and the two-yearly basis comes to a conclusion this March. Part of the criteria that was that it wasn't to fund posts, so because obviously that always carries a problem with annual or biannual funding on the run-up to the end of that grant. And we're obviously in a dialogue with the CSPs around this. As with all of these things, COVID has an impact. As members will know, as part of the local resilience forum structures for dealing with COVID, there is a recovery group with representations from right across the agencies within Cambridgeshire, looking at the areas where investment and remodelling of services will be required. So in many ways, there's a lot of indicators pointing to not allocating prematurely based upon historic ways of allocating and looking for opportunities for real improvement in the future. Services have radically changed how they've been delivered during COVID, and this is an opportunity for us to continue to sort of monopolise or consolidate those improvements. But as I say, the funding for these C&D, these crime and disorder grants, comes out of the core police grant. And as I say, historically, it has been done on either a 1 or 2 year basis. There's currently no intention with the current commissioner to remove that grant, but there is a real will for it to be used in a different way for the benefit of all the CSPs and therefore the communities within Cambridgeshire. I suspect if there was an incredibly good opportunity that needed seizing very quickly, the commissioner would reconsider waiting and leaving it for the new commissioner. But as I say, at this moment in time, that hasn't come forward, and part of the reason for that is that most of the agencies we work with are still up completely engaged with the COVID response. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just come in, this discussion is about approximately £161 million, and not just about 150,000. If we take it in context, thank you.
Understood. Thank you. It's
Can I just come back quickly on that?
Yeah, come.
Yeah, I agree it is, but to the people that it affects, that £150,000 is a lot of money, and it is making a big impact. So I think it is quite relevant. And also, could I just say then that surely before a final decision is made whether to cut anybody's granting at that time, surely this information would be helpful so that it could be sort of looked at and discussed, and then so that we can discuss how the impact is going to be on us and how we deal with it before the cut is made, please.
This is not a cut, this is actually funding, but I'll pass over to Jim again, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I was about to make the point. The way that the grant system operates is that a grant is allocated for a specific purpose, for a specific duration, for a specific outcome. So at the end of that grant, it isn't a cut when that grant stops. So this is not a cut. This is the next round of the grant. But as I say, I'm happy to send far more details through directly. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thanks, Jim. And if I keep saying cut, you'll have to excuse me. You know, I only took on this role on the 21st of January, and this was sort of dropped onto me, and it was sort of described to me as a cut. So if we change the word cut to change, then it'll probably make more sense. So if we could have, if sort of Fenland District Council could have a lot more information on that change that we could discuss before that change happens, so that we can have a better understanding of where we are, I think that would be a much better way to go about it, if all in agreement.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I'll send the information through if the Secretariat could give me your details, and it would probably then also be easier for a phone call as well, because as you say, this is not easy language, and there's an awful lot of history with this.
Can I suggest that we could circulate this to all panel members, because I don't think this is just Fenland who are concerned about this.
Thanks for that, guys.
Yeah, I'm sure we can do that.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know quite a lot has been said by colleagues in terms of how lowest funded we are. The issue of Cambridgeshire Constabulary and Peterborough City being funded in such in a fashion that has really cost us a lot of money, and we've had to reduce services to our communities. This has been going on for nearly a decade, for as long as I can remember. You know, the stubbornness of this government, whatever the government it is, you know, it is beyond belief. I know the Chief said that, and also the Acting Commissioner, that there are other localities who feel the same. Well, we are the 5th lowest funded. There are a lot of others. They're probably, you know, there'll probably be some losers. So I think that we need to make sure that the government, you know, funds us properly and adequately. So I just want to make that point, that it's not a new issue. It's been going on for nearly a decade, and we have lost out so much that we could have delivered to our communities. But I know a lot have already been said. I welcome, in terms of the increase in diversity within our workforce. I hope that that diversity will be reflected within the different levels of the constabulary as well. So I welcome that. I know that you know, some 1170 responses were received. The precept, you know, with a population of nearly 1 million, you know, I'm not too sure that that's a good indicator, but at least people have responded. I represent an area which is very diverse, lots of challenges, and often I'm contacted by people who are quite clearly dissatisfied with the response that they're getting. And the question that I'm asking, that I find it very difficult in these challenging times when people are facing such uncertainty, to go out in my community and say that you're going to have to pay extra for services that they feel are being cut. I really want some reassurance from the Acting Commissioner and the Chief Constable that communities like mine in the urban areas of Peterborough City, who feel they have been let down, crime is rising, there is deepening frustration, what long-term plan have they got? And when I look at these 1170 responses, I'd just like to see, and I know 24% were from Peterborough, but I also would like to see how they were distributed, basically. So I feel that a lot of people don't even respond because they feel it doesn't matter what they say, the police, the council, they'll do whatever they want anyway. So I'm a bit, you know, I share the frustrations of the communities I represent. I appreciate that the satisfaction levels that the Chief Constable shared with us, they are quite encouraging and they're improving. But that's not what I hear out there in the area that I represent. And we need to do something about that to win those communities back, because I'm really concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to read to you, I mean, in terms of who did we ask? So we asked the local authority or other elected bodies and members, and the survey was passed to the CSPs, MPs, and the panel secretariat. It was also distributed to the local authorities. That's the CAMS and PCC and the district councils, and that was via the Warn and Inform group. Additionally, the survey was also shared with representative groups, and that was as well through all the local media outlets. We informed the Community First Peterborough. We informed the Countryside Watch, Neighbourhood Watch, the National Farmers Union, the Cambridge and Peterborough Against Scams Partnership, Voiceability, Health Watch, Kite Trust, the Youth Panel, Huntingdonshire Business Against Crime, Little People UK, Huntingdonshire Community Group, Gladstone District Community Association, Stop Hate UK, Speak Out Council, Cambridge University Jewish Society, Cambridgeshire Chinese Centre.
I'm sorry, but I appreciate that. You've sent a lot of these questionnaires to all these organisations. I don't think you're addressing, I mean, you mentioned Community First, who are very active in my area. You look at their Facebook posts, basically, and, quite often, I mean, you just have to look at their comments in terms of how concerned they are about law in the locality. I fully appreciate that you've done everything that you could in terms of sending out surveys to all those organizations, and I respect and appreciate that.
Yep, and I understand that, but I cannot force people to comment on this. I can only put it out. But I'd like to hand over to the Chief Constable, if that's okay.
Hi, Councillor Ali, and first of all, can I thank you during the last 12 months for your continued support to the not only the constabulary, more in particular to the communities of Peterborough. I know we have had several dialogues about certain incidents, and your support is most welcome. Look, I can give you my reassurance that we do listen to the communities. Yes, it is challenging times, but the allocation of officers and the allocation of PCSOs through the neighbourhood policing model is based upon three elements in relation to core elements of that allocation. And that's around crime volume, around crime harm, and also about vulnerabilities location index, which goes into the deprivation, the diversity, and the challenges which each community faces. I mentioned at the beginning of the briefing, and I know you acknowledged the percentage of satisfaction that has increased within the community, and perhaps that's not reflected in what you see through your constituents. But back in 2017, 2018, certainly when I took over, I looked at, are we dealing with issues that matter to the community? It sat at just over 50%. We now sit nigh on 65, up to 70% in relation to that, which I think is testament to neighbourhood policing. Neighbourhood policing, as I've always said, and I've committed to this panel on the last 3 years since I presented here, is at the heart of what this constabulary is about whilst I'm the Chief Constable. In 2019, I promised 50 additional officers into neighbourhood policing, and a year later I came back to this panel and said they have been delivered and are secured within this community. And in 2017, we only had 57 police constables within neighbourhood policing. It is now above 130. In relation to Peterborough, if you recall, Councillor Ali, then in terms of neighbourhoods, you had just two policing neighbourhood officers within Peterborough. You now have 28. So my commitment to neighbourhood policing stands for itself. Can we do more? Of course we can do more. Of course we can listen. And my plans around the neighbourhood policing structure under the transformation, which I've tried to outline in brief detail during this presentation, puts the community at its heart and recognises the important issue that you raised at the beginning of your opening, which is around diversity and reflecting the communities that we serve, and most importantly, listening and doing something about those concerns. So you have my reassurance that I am committed, as with Superintendent Kate Anderson, who takes charge of Peterborough in the next few weeks once on Andy's retirement.
And Councillor Ali, from myself, you know that as the deputy, I came out to your area and met with you on a number of occasions. And had we'd not had COVID, I would have loved to have come out and met with them again to actually discuss and pass on their fears, their worries, and their issues to the Chief Constable. However, at the moment, the only way I can do it is through the internet, telephone calls, etc. But I do understand the issues that you are facing, and I've discussed this with the Chief Constable before, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Actually, Commissioner, just sort of following up on this, I mean, I think an observation that we would make of the survey was that, yes, you managed to get an absolute number that was comparable with last year, but it is still certainly not representative by age of the constituency, with 41% being aged over 65 amongst those who responded, and over 62% aged over 55. So I think your office does need to look really carefully at which other organisations to partner with in order to get a more representative sample response from younger people. And I think also a point that's kind of emerging from this discussion is it would be useful to see a breakdown of support for the increase in the precept by district. In other words, to have a clearer view of whether Fenland is as supportive of an increase, or Peterborough is as supportive of an increase as Cambridgeshire as an average. So I think a little bit more breakdown of responses by district and a bit more effort to reach particularly younger and in the other poorly representative groups within the population, I think would be appreciated. But that's advice for next year.
And yes, Mr. Chairman, we have looked at this, and we will, or the office will next year, look at how they reach the hard to reach people and how to get people to respond to these. But hopefully, if we get this precept through, they'll see the difference that it makes, and next year people will be responding because they see the benefits that they've seen.
I may come back to you on that one, but I want to move on to Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be as brief as I can because I'm conscious of time. It's questions around page 58 of the report, and there's a couple of points really. One is on the police officer 20,000 uplift. I'm looking at the costs, yet if I look at the income, the uplift grant income year 1 and then 2s and 3s, that doesn't seem to match the amount. So presumably we're not getting, government are not giving us all of that money, so we're funding something, and then presumably going forward, when the spending review does finally get done, that'll get consolidated into the spending, the formula grant. Second point is on capital funding, financing. The financing costs have gone from, or going from 2290 in current year right up to 7350, nearly 7.5 million in the fourth year of the MTF. And I think John alluded to it, that because of the lack of capital grant, we're funding capital financing through revenue. So that I see that as a risk. And the final point is really touching on John's answer to Councillor Massey in terms of the crime reduction projects. I'm trying to get my head around how that 500k in the third and fourth year gets into reserves, but I mean that may be one to take outside the meeting. I don't want to hold it up for that, but hopefully those make sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I hand over to John, please, for these?
Thank you, Councillor. All very pertinent questions. Thank you. So the uplift funding, you can probably appreciate, it's never as straightforward coming from the government as you'd perhaps like. So what they do with the uplift funding is they put a chunk into our core funding settlement. So in the formula grant, they've made some recognition of the uplift programme within there. What they did then was included an element of the funding that was ring fenced, which is the bit that you've referred to, that's the £1 million and then the 3.5 in there. So the purpose of that was to incentivise police forces to achieve their numbers, so that some of that uplift funding was linked to the achievements, almost like payment by results type approach. So it's a little bit of a dual system, if you like. And what we've seen, and that's part of that funding change I referred to in 21-22, is that they've put more into the formula grant rather than the ring fence. So it's a little bit difficult to predict, and until we get the actual settlement, we don't know exactly what the amount going into the core grant is and how much is going to be there in terms of ring fence. So hopefully that clarifies that one for you. The capital financing, absolutely right in terms of the additional cost that will be borne. I think the thing we perhaps need to bear in mind with the period that we're looking at is the capital disposals that will ultimately come into the picture and the financial planning side of it beyond the current period. So if we talk about the current construction of the Southern Police Station, that's captured within this, which is probably driving a significant amount of the borrowing that we're having to undertake as well. But ultimately, and subject to due process, etc., there will be the need to look at the capital value of the existing Parkside site, although no formal decision has been made on that yet. But the planning assumption would be that there'll be capital receipts due in that would help to repay some of that borrowing. So it's perhaps a little bit of the high end that you're perhaps seeing here, but I think it's that longer term picture that we need to be taken into account there. And then finally, in terms of the prevention reserve that we would look to create, at the moment we are still holding a budget assistance reserve of some £2 million. As I think we've articulated within this, and part of the conversation last year with the budget was to remove any use of reserves from the budget, because that's just not sustainable and not a good way to plan financially. So that budget reserve is still there to help mitigate against any risks. At the moment, the plan is to convert £500,000 of that into the prevention fund that we would hold on the balance sheet in 23-24 that I referred to there. But more than happy to have that conversation.
No, I think I understand it now, actually. Now you've mentioned it, I've seen that other line. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, thank you to the Chief, the Commissioner and his officers for a very good presentation. You know, some people have moaned that it's a particularly long presentation, but, you know, I do expect the police to give good evidence, which they have done in this presentation. Look, if we were sat here having had a normal year as we've normally had, and not now coming out the back of a global pandemic, I'd probably be declining the recommendations in this report in relation to raising the precept, but we haven't. We're still coming out of a global pandemic, and the world is a completely different place to where we have been in the past. So that in itself has put pressures on policing. I do share what people have said, in particular Councillor Lynn, in relation to the CSP, and I'm particularly worried about the concerns in Huntingdonshire, as I represent Huntingdonshire here. I guess we've got no alternative, because ultimately we sit here and listen about government saying that we don't get decent funding off them. I was only yesterday, I was with the Children's Minister arguing for funding for children's services in Cambridgeshire. And it's repeated and seems to be repeated in every panel and committee I sit on, that government funding to Cambridgeshire is poor in every aspect. So I welcome the Chair's proposal that we actually, you know, politically we join together and put pressure on government to increase funding for Cambridge, and particularly the police. So, you know, look, I understand these are difficult times, and it's really difficult financially for our residents. But what is the alternative? I haven't seen any alternative. The alternative is not to agree this and then ultimately put pressure on our police and face further cuts, which then creates further problems, and we snowball in this problem of the perceived problems that we see and have heard from every member here. So I am reluctantly going to support the increased precept. You know, it's something that weighs heavily on my heart. You know, we talk about £1.25 per month. That's a lot of money for some people. I mentor a young care leaver and he has to live on £60 a month. So, you know, if we're asking for a £1.25 increase, that's a huge pressure on some young people within our county. So I absolutely get that. But what is the alternative? Because I don't know what that alternative is. So my question, sorry, Chair, just quickly, is in relation to Emergency Services Mobile Communication Programme. Matthew Warren and Councillor Shellens know from our involvement in the fire service, this seems to be going on for years. And I think John touched on the fact that, you know, this may have a solution in our MTFS 2 years down the line. but is it? Because this has gone on for years, and I just wonder about the funding for it and where this is going to go, really.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. Yes, there are a number of things that I've been doing, and it's not about funding just for funding's sake. It's about fairer funding. It's why in my role as a councillor, I have been doing the same thing for Peterborough to try and get fairer funding. We need fairer funding so that we can actually have the force funded to a level that we need. But we are where we are, and I would like to ask John to go on to the last item that you said.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bywater. So yeah, ESMCP is a big red flag at the moment, just in terms of the pure numbers. I'm sure you're seeing that in other public sector organisations. Well, in terms of the timing, so I've recently started work on a national portfolio in respect to this. I'm starting to see a lot more of the detail around this. I think probably all I'll say at this stage is that there is a business case refresh happening right now. So that's within the ESMCP programme team in the Home Office. That's due to report within the next 6 months with a view to going back into the major projects review group within Treasury, which hopefully I think at that point will give us more clarity in terms of taking the planning forward around this. I think the steer we're getting from the programme and from the information we've got at the moment is to start planning and factoring it in. And also what we've got within this budget is not just the capital cost. Within some of the collaborated units, we've got resources that we need to build in to deploy and build the capacity to actually bring the implementation and the mobilisation in respect to that. So we've got those costs within the Seven Force region in the east. There's going to be cost in relation to the local PCA collaboration in terms of the ICT configuration, control room upgrades, and everything that comes with it. So it is a risk, I think. In terms of the timing, I understand there will be an integrated programme plan that will continue to be refreshed and reiterated during that kind of same 6 month period. So hopefully when we get to the summer, I'm hopeful, and I know we've had probably quite a number of false starts on this one, haven't we? So I'm hoping now that there does seem to be a bit more momentum with changes in some of the programme management, that we will start to see a bit more traction and more certainty in terms of what's actually going to happen around this.
Thanks, John. Chair, if you just indulge me very quickly, I just wanted to pick up on one point. Also, just in relation to what the Chief Constable said in relation to detectives, I think it's absolutely crucial that we invest in good quality detectives and the training that they need, because I think that's instrumental in the complex world of investigations that we live in now. And then just finally, I promise to be quiet after this, is I just want to send a public message out to all our police officers and the staff that work within the organisation, just to publicly thank them for all the work that they've done over the last 12 months, because they get a lot of rap of their time, and I think it's important that we recognise some of the sterling work that they've done over the last 12 months. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure all panel members will fully echo and endorse that call for a thanks. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've sat here listening very patiently to the whole of the debate, trying to get an overall feel of it. I, like probably many of you, will reluctantly have to support this. I say reluctantly because words have been said like public satisfaction and neighbourhood policing is so important. All I hope is that these will improve. Now, let me explain. The way I work as a councillor is when I get somebody complaining, making issues about any subject, I get them to put that complaint in and direct them where to send that to copy me into their deliberations. Consequently, I get back a copy of the reply. And usually, lots of the times it's satisfied. However, with the police, the local police here it seems to be a standard letter. And the thrust of it is we're understaffed. I don't say they're underpaid, but I have a, this is the sergeant speaking, I can give you copies of the letter. I have an area so big and I only have so much, and I've only got 1.5 or 4.5 PCS to do it, and there's much more important crimes happening rather than what is actually concerning the local residents. You know, something's got to be done about this, and I appreciate that we don't have enough officers, but what really matters to residents is local, very, very, very local policing. Hopefully, the Chief Constable will take that on board, and he will look at the very local issues, especially in St Neots, and I will mention that isn't happening as far as local neighbourhood policing is concerned. You know, so please look at that. And yes, I will be supporting it. And if I'm still on the council next year after the elections, and if I'm elected to this police authority, then I will be monitoring it very, very carefully to see what improvements have been done. But when we get a very negative response from our local police officer in charge, it doesn't help the situation. On a final point, and I promised, like Councillor Bywater, to shut up after this one, it's great that we've got 40, I think it's 40 more officers, and you know, under the government scheme, and it's all hunky-dory. And as I think expected, some of the PCSOs have gone over to being full-time police. That's fine. I'm not quite clear whether we're replacing the PCSOs. Perhaps you can just help me on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. In relation to public confidence, I think some of the members of the panel will know that what I've been doing is actually having regular surgeries with parish councils, councillors, and other public members and public groups. And I bring along people to those meetings to give a briefing and to listen to their questions. And those are taken back to the Chief Constable. And the Chief Constable has actually attended some of those himself. So we're doing everything we can to ensure from my side that the public are heard, and also that we try and raise that public confidence within the constabulary work.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask a very quick question? When did you come to St Neots? Because I seem to have missed that.
It was sent out to all councillors and parish councillors. I can't remember the date of that one, but there were people from St Neots on it, and it was in the evening, and it was over the internet.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think
I've just been informed by Jim that we can send you the date of that, and hopefully whoever takes over as the Commissioner after the elections, they will continue, because I think it's a really worthwhile tool that we can use to ensure that the public are heard.
Well, as I say, I don't recall having been aware of meeting the St Neots, the largest town in Cambridgeshire, incidentally, parish council, town council, but I would welcome that tape. Thank you.
I think just amplifying Councillor John's point about the need to be able to demonstrate to council taxpayers that their money has bought a better policing service. I think we will, as a panel, be looking to the OPCC for a report setting out how, in particular, the 5 STRA objectives, safeguarding the vulnerable, combating inquisitive crimes such as burglary and so on, how each of those is going to be measured and what the milestones are going to be to demonstrate that there has been a meaningful improvement, and how that is being reflected in the the public's understanding of policing as well, because clearly there's a reality as to in terms of how many crimes are detected and how many prosecutions are successful, and there's also the community being aware and confident that the police is going to protect them. So I think it isn't a question for now. I think it's something that we as a panel need to be looking for a report in the future, possibly from your successor. But we do need to be able to monitor the sort of return on investment.
And the question about PCSO replacement?
I'll hand over to the Chief Constable, please.
Yeah, in relation to the PCSOs, the announcements which I made before Christmas reduced the PCSOs down from 80 to 40. So in short, Councillor, they won't be replaced. There's the operating model which I propose is to operate with 40 PCSOs across the county as opposed to 80.
Okay, moving to Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So really, I think I'm just sort of summing up in a way what I've said before, but I've got 3 points. My first point is about this, basically what is the move from central government funding to local government funding. So we're taking on more and more of the work in a way of the funding that central government should be doing. And I think that we ought to recognise that. I mean, it seems to me that a number of us are very reluctant to agree to this increase. So we ought to recognise that shift. And Chairman, through you, could I ask again that we take this up? We, as a panel, think about lobbying, as you've mentioned before. In relation to the CSP, the funding for the CSP, it's a very small amount of money, but there does seem to have been a shift or a proposed shift in future. But we've only learnt about that today. There doesn't seem to have been any consultation or discussion about it. And yet for each member of the panel, it's important in their local communities. That's my second point. And my third point really is I was one of the people who moaned in inverted commas about the papers. What I was really asking for was a presentation that is clearer and more succinct. I wasn't asking for less detail. It was more the presentation of the papers. Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to the CSPs, the last one was a 2-year funding for projects. So moving on, it's going to be new projects that are being funded, but we're asking people to look at it in a larger scale. So that's something that I'm hoping whoever is the replacement for myself will take on board and actually see that the funding is still there, but it's how it is allotted to different council areas so that they come together to work together as a larger group rather than just single groups.
No. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, Jim Haylett. If I could just clarify on that last point about lack of consultation. This was discussed at the county-wide community safety group where all of the CSP chairs are invited to. As I say, so it wasn't a detailed consultation per se for the explanation I gave earlier around it, the nature of grant funding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just come back on the briefings, the surgeries that I use for parish councils? The Huntingdonshire DC briefing was on the 9th of November. Full notes on that briefing are on the website. So that's the OPCC website if you wish to look for them.
And St Neots?
Sorry, it was the Huntingdonshire and St Neots.
Okay, thank you very much, Acting Commissioner. Councillor Lynn.
Yeah, I just want to say sort of finally where I sit with this really. For me, I have to sort of juggle two things here. I have to juggle whether we vote for an increase in police funding in the precept for the police at maybe the cost of rising mental health, possible more homelessness, and many more problems that it can bring to young people in the community that are probably just starting out in life, wanting to buy a home, and taking these opportunities away from them. I do understand, I do appreciate the police more than I could ever say, and I do know that they need more funding. And I will be happy this year to spend all this year with this panel and fight as hard as we can politically against central government to help get that funding recovered for the police and for the rest of Cambridgeshire in many areas that we need it to prevent these things. But I just don't feel that I can squeeze more money out of people's pockets that are already really, really struggling with losing their jobs through COVID and lots of other things. So unfortunately today, I'm just not going to be able to support an increase in precept. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not seeing any other hands up at the moment, but I've got a couple of questions in case anything occurs to you. Acting Commissioner, on page 21 of the agenda pack, paragraph 6.9, we see this mention of the 80% of police demand is not crime related. And this crops up regularly in reports. And we do ask questions about it, but I still don't feel that we have a very clear picture of what that 80% comprises. We've discussed people dealing with helping people with mental health problems and missing persons, and there are clearly other categories. But what I would be really keen for us to understand is, of that 80%, what is it that the constabulary believes it is not reasonable for the police to be responsible for? Clearly there are non-policing responsibilities which are nevertheless, there are non-crime responsibilities which are nevertheless policing responsibilities. But I think what we need to get a handle on is what are the areas in which other agencies are not pulling their weight. So I would look for a report at a future panel meeting on a more detailed analysis of what these 80% of police demand not being crime related, to help us understand exactly what that pressure means and how that's going to change over time. It's been identified that other agencies are pulling back, and that's kind of forcing the police to step forward. But I don't think that that's clearly understood, and the implications of that are clearly understood in terms of the impact on the core police service. I don't know if you had any particular comment on that. I'm not looking for one, Acting Commissioner. Are you still with us, Acting Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you. I do know that there are things that the constabulary deal with. There are mental health issues. There are people who have not necessarily received what they believe is the service from the health. So we do get people who are suicidal, or where the police have to respond because it's a risk to their lives. So it's not necessarily a crime, but it's things like that that the police have to respond to. I'm sure the Chief Constable can give you a bigger breakdown, but I'm sure we can bring a report to you at a later panel meeting.
Yeah, I'm not looking for detailed answers now, but can I just ask for if there's support from other panel members to request such a report? I'm seeing some nods, yes. Okay, so we'll make a note and we'll bring it to an appropriate panel meeting. I don't want to overburden the next meeting, but certainly within the next 1 or 2 meetings, I think. The other area that I wanted to just dig into a little bit deeper is on the capital funding. This does seem to be one of the bigger risks that the MTFS holds within it. You know, and it has been explained to us before that central government policy is to require borrowing rather than central government grants to fund capital investment. But this does store up a level of debt and therefore interest payments and capital repayments. So my worry is that we're going to get into a situation where a future commissioner, a future chief constable, may be forced into selling assets in order to sort of service the debt. And to be more specific, if I've understood it correctly, the table on page 81 is a paragraph 3.12. Are these current debts? So are these debts that the constabulary, or the OPCC rather, is currently carrying, and therefore that the capital investment programme is on top of that, so that the table on page 78 is additional to that 17.5 million. Perhaps you could just confirm or deny whether I understood this correctly.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to say that the estate is something that, as a police and crime commissioner acting, it's what you inherit. You find that the estate is getting older and needs more attention, but it's something that we have to deal with. And so I'd like to ask, I think it's John who may be able to answer the rest of the question.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Edward, sorry, could you just repeat the references you picked up there? Was it page?
So there's a table on page 81 of what appears to be, which talks about balance as at 30th of November 2020 of loans 1 to 6. So if I answered it correctly, those are loans that the OPCC is currently servicing.
Yes, we've already drawn those, yes. And so anything in the capital programme where there's additional external borrowing would be on top of that.
Okay, so where it says that the peak borrowing will be 41.5 million, that doesn't, if I've understood it correctly, that doesn't actually include the 17.5 million that's already drawn down. Is that correct?
No, that's right, that's correct. But then what that doesn't sort of, what you don't get from the tables that you're referring to is the length of borrowing, because part of what we're looking at in terms of the funding model for the Southern Police Station is almost like a bridging loan in the short term to minimise that longer term sort of borrowing that we need to undertake, whilst we pull together the strategy around the disposals and whether we can bring in capital receipts to minimise that impact going forward. So I think from that perspective, what you've got is that snapshot of the MTFP period where we're, in order to fund the capital expenditure in those particular years, we are having to draw down that additional borrowing. But in terms of what you're not getting is the maturity profile of the borrowing that we are having to take out, which would then manifest itself in the treasury management aspects that we look at.
Okay, well, what I'd like to ask for is for a consolidated loan and repayment profile table so that we can see the full liabilities of the OPCC over time, because particularly that bar chart on page 82, that really doesn't mean anything to me. That's not telling me what the cumulative debt is, and if I've understood correctly, there's a £15.5 million repayment included in one of the tables, which I'm assuming is the sale of Parkside. But it would be useful to understand what proportion of that is, that's a net. So it would be useful to see what the profiling is of new borrowing and repayments, because I've really struggled to fully understand the story about the capital expenditure, and it's clearly a high risk element of the MTFS.
Edward, what probably would be useful is if, like we say, we can consolidate that and bring it all under one paper, so you can also see what the impact is on the revenue budget as well. and how that looks for the longer term. So once we understand better the options for the sale of Parkside, because there are a number of scenarios which we're working through at the moment, then I would suggest we bring that paper back to the Police and Crime Panel as a standalone paper, so you can understand how it all joins together.
That would be useful, because I'm also concerned that you've got a £3 million a year of revenue contribution to the capital budget, in addition to the servicing the loans. So this looks like it is going to become quite a significant part of the total budget.
Yeah.
And the Chief Constable has rightly talked about the inflexibility that he has with so much of the budget being sort of ring fenced for personnel. If another, if a large chunk of what is discretionary is actually also ring fenced for servicing loans, then actually that margin of flexibility becomes very, very small. And that itself is a big risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to be clear, also paragraph 3.14, so this is page 82, this has got the total capital financing costs broken out into interest and capital repayments. Now, let's just take 2020, 2021, £604,000 a year interest. Now, my understanding is the LRWB, or whatever it's called, rate is currently about 1%. And therefore, I don't quite understand how that can be resulting in £600,000 worth of interest.
Well, it's about the loan profile, won't it? So it'll be depending on the breakdown of the loans.
Yeah, so that would be obviously the interest across all of the loan portfolios, not just that amount in the current year. So servicing all of that debt that you referred to earlier, plus any new debt as well. And then the MRP element will be linked to the life of assets as well. So as loans they'll be linked to, typically for a building, we would apply MRP in terms of the write down of loans over a 40-year period. Where we're having to fund short life assets, as I referred to earlier, like ICT and the ESMCP program, they're written down over three to 5 years. So a £3 million investment on emergency services network would cost us £1 million a year in terms of doing it. So that's the strategy in terms of building in revenue contributions to mitigate the need to borrow for that short life type stuff as well. But I think if we pull that all back into that paper that Matt refers to, the calculations are there sitting behind that. Some of the loans that are drawn down already will have fixed interest rates attached to them. So that's probably why it's not equating down to like a 1% interest rate that you're currently kind of seeing in terms of the markets. And I think PWLB loans at the moment are sort of in the longer term are running probably at 1.8%, something like that. So there's another again of different variables that will be feeding into that single number that you're picking up.
Okay, well, it would certainly be useful to see as a consolidation of all of this in a fully profiled over the borrowing period, so that we can really understand what the future situation will be. Okay, thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions that other members would like to ask on this particular item? So in which case, that brings us to voting on the Commissioner's recommendation, which is to increase the council tax precept for policing by £15 a year for a Band D property. So obviously less for a lower band and more for a higher band. Moving to a vote, therefore, could you please indicate if you are supportive of the Commissioner's proposal? If you can raise your hand through the, Jane, are you happy to do it by a visual vote, or do you want to be people putting their hand up virtually?
I can do a roll call if you like. That might be easier if people are happy to do that.
Yes, that's probably better, yeah. Just to be absolutely certain.
Councillor Ali.
As much as I appreciate the work that the police are doing, I'm going to abstain.
Councillor Bywater.
I'm in favour of the recommendations.
Councillor Daunton.
Mute.
Sorry, I'm very reluctantly in favour.
Claire George. Claire.
Yes, I'll support them.
Thank you. In favour. Councillor Giles.
I'm afraid I'm going to abstain on this.
Edward.
I will support.
Councillor Lynn.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I just can't hand on heart say that I can do it. So it's a no from me.
Councillor Massey.
I appreciate, very similar to what Councillor Ali has said, that I appreciate all the work the police are doing and I completely support them, but I'm going to abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Sharp.
For the proposal.
Councillor Shellings.
Or
Don't have Councillor Tierney. Councillor Warren.
For proposal.
And Councillor Wiggin.
Or
That should have got all of you, yes? 1, 2. Right, I have 8 in favour, 3 abstained and 1 no.
Okay, so therefore the panel does support your proposal, Acting Commissioner, and we will confirm that in writing.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Chief Constable and his team, John and Matthew, for their hard work putting this together, along with my team of Jim, Ali, Nikki, and everybody else within the team. And I'd like to thank you for actually your vote and your positivity behind this. But what I would like to say is please, please do make some effort to contact the government and do some work around trying to get a fairer kind of settlement for the police. We're not looking for anything else other than a fairer settlement.
Yeah, Acting Commissioner, we certainly take that on board, and I think we need to discuss how we can coordinate lobbying from the region to make it, to have a more powerful voice on this very point. And I think you can see from the vote from members that support for any further increases of the precept in future years, which obviously won't be under your under your term of office, but nevertheless for the rest of the officers and the Chief Executive, I think you'll need to look very carefully at how to justify further increases, even if the government is pushing you to increase the precept above the sort of inflation rate. Okay, we've spent a lot of time moving on that, and we've somewhat overrun. We have one more item before we can let you go, Acting Commissioner. Item number 8, decisions by the Acting Police and Crime Commissioner. Are there any decisions that members would like to ask a question on? I just have one question for you, Acting Commissioner, which is, are you confident that there has been enough work done on the planning application for the Southern Policing Hub to satisfy all of the concerns about the application? Because I see it has been delayed twice, and therefore, if you get a negative decision, or you get a highly conditioned decision, that clearly could have an impact. So do you feel that you have invested, or there has been enough investment of time and effort in getting that application absolutely absolutely right.
Yes, I'm satisfied. The reasons why the delay, there were a few different reasons, but the main reasons have been worked through with the people, and so I'm quite happy that should it reach the planning, that we should have a good outcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes the part of the meeting where we need your presence, Acting Commissioner, and your staff. So I release you all. Thank you very much indeed for your time and all your answering all of our questions, to the Chief Constable and to the Chief Finance Officer in particular. And thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Bye.
So now moving on to the final item, which is just setting the agenda plan for the next meetings. You'll see that we have a date on there for the 17th of February. We won't need that. That was there.
Edward, we've missed, you missed an item.
Oh, have I? Sorry. Oh, yes, sorry. For some reason that's not bookmarked. Item 9. Where is item 9?
The
verbal update, Chair.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes. Yes, for some reason that didn't come up on the bookmarks. Yes. But it is on the plan you gave me. Yes, so this is an update on the task and finish group. Just before I hand over to Claire George just to update the panel on this, if anyone hasn't yet been interviewed by the Centre for Public Scrutiny, or whatever it's called, could you please contact Jane to arrange for that to go out? It may only be Councillor Giles who hasn't yet had an interview. Is that correct? Is there anyone else who hasn't? Councillor Wigan, you haven't had an interview yet.
Councillor Lynn won't have done, but obviously they weren't doing substitutes at the time.
No.
I'm not sure it's to do with the experience that you've had, so I'm not sure that Councillor Lynn will have will be able to contribute at the moment. But he will.
Quick meeting.
Pardon?
That would be a quick meeting.
It would be, yes.
Yeah. Well, Councillor, if you could have a word with Councillor Warwick, Susan, and if there are any issues that she particularly felt need to be raised, because what we're doing is we're reviewing how the panel works, what resources, additional resources we might need, or how we should use our existing resources differently. So it may be that she has some thoughts, or that you having a discussion with her might lead to some thoughts that you'd like to feed into the review, in which case could you just contact Jane and make sure that we get those fed through. So Councillor Giles, I believe you haven't yet had an interview, is that right? And Councillor Wigan.
Oh, no, Councillor Wigan has, haven't you?
Let's slip through the net somewhere.
You have, haven't you, Councillor Wigan?
Can you slip me through the net again, please?
Okay, so Jane will organise with you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Wigan, have you had an interview?
No, I haven't.
Have you not? Oh, I thought you had.
No, I sent you through the dates that I was available, but they were quite restrictive because of work, although I'm now self-isolating at home. So.
Oh, okay, so you've got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Are you well? Yes.
Yeah, I'm fine. It was it's my manager at work who tested positive, and I was sat nearest to him.
Okay, I'll sort that. I'll be in contact then.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So if I can hand over to Claire to just update us on the process of the task and finish group.
Thank you. So as Edward's already explained, we made a decision together to set up a task and finish group to look at the processes, the agenda planning, and generally to see whether we could make some improvements in terms of our effectiveness in holding the Police and Crime Commission office to account. So we had our first meeting just prior to Christmas. Jane had very kindly done some background research for us and had brought to the meeting a proposal from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and having talked about it, talked through what we wanted to achieve, reassured ourselves that there was some money in the budget to pay for their work. It seemed generally a good idea to have an external view, with the kind of caveat that we wanted to make sure that our local issues and our local experiences were fully taken into consideration. Jane's done all the legwork in terms of setting up interviews. I had mine yesterday, and I think most of you will have spoken to them in the last week. The idea is that they will then collate information from us. They will do things like look at panel agendas, the way that we identify topics. They intend to observe a couple of meetings, and they will then pull all of that information together into a report that has some recommendations. And I believe, Jane, you've asked them to attend the March meeting to give us an update at that point. And kind of the end outcome will be a workshop for panel members, probably once the new commissioner is in place, because their view, I think, and ours as well, is that's really quite a good kind of timely opportunity to reflect and refine perhaps our approaches and make them slightly more robust as we move forward, working alongside a new commissioner.
Thank you, Kurt. Does anyone have any questions for Claire on that?
Well, that's really because I didn't have any answers.
Claire, I've got it just occurred to me. So you're saying that the workshop should be after the next commissioner is elected. I was just wondering whether we kind of need to be a bit more prepared than that, in the sense that the commissioner is going to come into office, with a manifesto and a sort of a desire to move quickly. And I fear that if we're coming in, a month or two down the line, that actually our position of influence may be quite relatively small. And although I understand that you want to have a dialogue with the OPCC and the new commissioner to help inform how we should work, I think we probably need to establish some rules, if you like, in advance of that, so that when the new commissioners, or even talking to the candidates possibly, but as soon as the new commissioner is in post, there are certain expectations of the relationship which are kind of already set, that we're not trying to sort of...
What you have to remember, Edward, though, is there's elections going on, and even if some of our members are not up for election, positions and roles can change within councils. So there's not necessarily the same members will stay on the panel, even if they stay as councillors. Their roles could change. So we could have a complete change on the panel.
Yes, I do. I understand that, and I'm not saying that we should do everything up front, but I just think we probably need to think of any changes to the way the panel works and its relationship with the OPCC that needs to be in place before the new commissioner comes in. I mean, to give you a sort of more concrete example, we've identified that one of the key areas in which collectively we perhaps failed was in monitoring the behaviour of the ex-commissioner. And that does require that we establish a relationship with the new commissioner from the start that allows us to have a more closely monitor, if you like, the commissioner's behaviour in office, and that has opened up channels by which people can communicate with us if they have concerns about a commissioner's behaviour. So that's just an example where perhaps we need to be a little bit ahead of the game. But I'm just putting that as something to think about within the task force.
And I think it's like, I mean, like I only spoke to Ian Parry yesterday, but I think it's likely that I think they've indicated to Jane that the full report won't be finished by the March meeting, but they should be in a position to give us kind of headlines and some outline in terms of recommendations and future activities and direction. And it may well be that there'll be things that we can take out of that at the end of March that would do that preparatory work prior to perhaps a full workshop with a new committee in the style that it's in the end of May, early June, however that works out.
Okay. Well, perhaps in practical terms, if you could just think about if there are recommendations that could come to me as chair, that I could then take, maybe through a conversation with candidates before they take office or soon after one has been elected, that if there are some things that can be communicated at that stage, that they are, and then we do the workshop to sort of firm up some of the other details as a panel with the new members. Yeah. So there's just there's that opportunity that I think we need to seize.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Massey.
Yes, I just wanted to say previously the panel has written, I believe, to districts to ask them to consider to keep the same panel members if at all possible.
Yeah.
Just for continuity. So I was just wondering if we were going to do that again, because I think it is a good idea, because continuity really is helpful when it comes to a panel like this.
Yeah, so I think, Jane, if you and I perhaps we just prepare communication to go out immediately off following the thing is that actually you need to know who are going to be the leaders of the parties, and that sometimes even that may change. But we'll queue up some communications to make sure that that message goes to the right people before they make decisions about who to appoint to the panel. I think that's a good point. Councillor Sharp.
Just very briefly, are we thinking of this report from the consultants coming back to the task and finish group before it comes back to the main group, or are we thinking it just goes to the main?
I think it will come back to the task and finish group first, definitely. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
No, because I mean, what I expressed at the task and finish group was I tend to find with consultants, they tell you what you want to hear, and I'm not necessarily, I think we should be chewing it around before we necessarily come. Yeah, it's got to be our recommendation, even if it takes most of what the consultant has told us, rather than just rubber stamping.
It will come back to the task and finish group, then it'll be your recommendation to the panel.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, others may disagree, but that's my feeling on consultants at times.
Yeah. No, but even if that weren't the case, now you need to be able to have that check. So yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
Chairman, might I say that I agree very much with Councillor Sharp, and I'm glad to hear Jane's confirmation that it will come back to the task force first.
Good. So are there any other questions or observations on that? Okay, well, thank you very much, Claire, for agreeing to chair it, and I look forward to the recommendations coming forward from that. So moving on to item 10, the meeting dates and agenda plan. So as I was starting to say before, the 7th of February is not needed, so you can delete that from your calendar. That was only needed.
Edward.
Sorry?
17th, sorry.
Yes, 17th of February. That was only going to be needed had we voted to veto the precept increase. So the next meeting and the last one before the next election is the 24th of March. Now, the one item that has floated around for a number of months now is roads policing. So do we still want to commission a report specifically on roads policing for the next meeting? Does anyone kind of just indicate whether that is something you positively support?
Edward, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't quite hear you. Your voice is very muffled.
Oh, sorry, is it okay at the moment, or?
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Yeah.
It is better. Yeah. Okay.
So what were you saying? Did we a report on?
So one of the reports that we've been talking about for commissioning is on roads policing. So
yes, okay.
Is that something that panel members would still like to see for the March meeting? I can see Councillor Massey indicating so. Some other nods. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you please suggest to Jane specific areas of concern with roads policing that you'd like? Councillor Bywater?
No, sorry, Chairman, I was going to come in after you finish. Sorry, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it just if you could ask to Jane specific questions on road policing. Those areas where you think there are systemic problems. So obviously not, specific roads where you're concerned, but if you feel that the priorities are not being set correctly, or that it's being ineffective, or anything, and you have evidence for that, then pass that to Jane so that we can get a good report on that. Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, Chairman, just something that's on my mind really. We touched on it about COVID really. Is it not worth us having a report on the impacts of COVID financially and on, just ultimately what impacts it's had on the service over that, because it will be almost 12 months since we went into lockdown really. So it might be a good understanding for us as members to ask questions related to that.
Yes, indeed. We haven't had a report specifically on that since we had what date it was, but we had the extraordinary meeting. So yes, I agree. An update on that would be useful. Is that supported by other members?
Yeah.
Can you just sort of indicate with a thumbs up or a? Yeah. Okay. So if we commission a report on an update on the impact of COVID on policing, and what mitigations they've had to put in place to cope with any longer running impacts of it, I guess. From the meeting today, there were two things that I think that we should be looking for. One is a more detailed, complete explanation of the capital expenditure. And I think that's probably timely to get that for the next meeting. Is that also supported? Yeah, okay. And the other one was on sort of milestones for measuring progress, to sort of see the return on investment. Now that may be something that's probably more relevant for the next commissioner to be responding to, because it will be part of their new police and crime plan. So I'm going to propose that we put that to come back to the June meeting rather than the March meeting. Does that make sense to members? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other than the update from Centre for Public Scrutiny, or at least, rather the recommendations from the task force, are there any other areas that you would like to see a report or further detail on?
You mentioned it today, because it cropped up again today, about that sort of 80%, 20% activity split. I've been here 4 years now, and I've heard that quoted throughout that time. But in my head, we've never actually got to the bottom. And I mean, today's response was woolly, to say the least. I would really like to see that nailed, and to understand what activities are in those 80% non-crime related that perhaps could go to other agencies, or should be with other agencies, or can they be picked up by PCSOs or a community psychiatric nurse or something. So I would like to see a really, really, really robust explanation and breakdown of that statistic, because it is quoted at such a lot of the time.
Yes, no, thank you for reminding me of that. That's really important. Councillor Lynn.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant, because we've just raised precepts, and if they're saying already they've got 80% of that are not crimes, and they tell us what they are, and then we see that they go up this year, how much is that due to the raising of the precepts sort of thing? And that could be helpful going forward every time we vote on precepts, because I think when everybody's flush, if they need a bit more help, that's the time to give. When everybody's squeezed and we're giving, and then people start falling about on the street, that raises that. It's like false economy. So if that's raising and they're spending all their time dealing with stuff that could have been prevented, then that's relevant to, that's got to be relevant to how we vote in future. Thanks.
Okay, so the reports we're asking for the next meeting are a COVID update, an explanation of what the 80% non-crime policing constitutes, and roads and a report on roads policing.
Could we have a breakdown of
the capital expenditure and borrowing breakdown? So I think that's probably enough for the meeting. If Jim indicates that he feels that they don't have the resources to do that, then I'll discuss that with him. But I'll try and get all of those reports for the next meeting. Are there any other questions, concerns, suggestions? Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your time and for your support.
Sorry,
Councillor Massey.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be quick because my husband's about to start teaching in the same room, so you're going to start getting another voice. So I'll say it very quickly. If we could have a report on the tactic of how they are dealing with aggressive begging. This is something I'm looking at within the city in any case, but off the back of the fact that I was attacked last week of an evening time walking out on my own street, but just because I ignored somebody who was asking for money. And so I think it would be good to ask the police and crime commissioner how assured is he that the current tactics that they're employing against aggressive begging is working.
Okay, I've made a note of that. We'll think how we bring that up, but I think you probably need to pursue that at a local level as well.
Oh, I am.
And the answers that you get will inform, help us to triangulate the commissioner's answer, if you like. Councillor Shellens.
Yes, just going back to the 80-20, what we don't want is a list saying, well, there are lots of people who have to go to hospital and we have to sit there with them until they can be accepted and so on. What we need is how long does that take?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't just need a list, we need quantifiable numbers.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and the other thing that I've sort of taken away from the meeting is I need to talk to some people about how we can coordinate lobbying for fairer funding for Cambridgeshire. It's obviously something that's been raised by the county, by the districts, by the police, and so we kind of need to see who's going to take a lead on that and how we can get multiple signatories to as a start, and multiple signatories to a letter to that effect. So I'll have some conversations around that.
Right, but on that, Edward, what we need is this group to send a letter and then this group to participate additionally with others so that we have a block request going in. But we should send our own letter now. Yeah, it won't make any difference. The government won't do it, but at least we can say that we've done it.
Yeah, if members are supportive of the idea of us writing a letter as the police and crime panel to the government, I'll do that. Does anyone think that's not a good idea? So, Councillor Massey, you've got a hand.
Yes, could we actually ask for a meeting? Could we as a panel ask for a meeting to discuss it with ministers?
I will take that on board. Councillor Wiggin.
Yeah, I was going to recommend that panel members put forward motions to their individual councils asking for the councils to write to ministers as well at the next full council meetings. If we prepared a text that we could all use that's politically balanced, so that everyone should be able to agree with it. I think all our councils should agree to it. Then that would be a way to coordinate an approach across all the council areas.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, I will draft a letter with Jane from the panel, and I will have some conversations about how we can have a coordinated response from all the districts. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your time. You can stop the recording now, I think.